The roar started low, like distant thunder rolling across the parade ground. 500 voices, perfectly synchronized, growing louder with each repetition. Martinez, Martinez, Martinez. I stood at attention on the stage, my Marine Corps dress blues immaculate in the morning sun, 3 stars gleaming on each shoulder. Below me, the entire 1st Marine Division had broken protocol, abandoned their ceremonial silence to chant the name their commanding general had earned in blood and fire. In the VIP section, my father sat frozen, his face draining of color as he finally understood. The daughter he dismissed just hours earlier as someone who probably files papers was the General Martinez these battle-hardened Marines were cheering for. I allowed myself the smallest smile. He'd wanted to know what I did for a living. Now he was getting his answer. The chanting had started spontaneously when I'd taken the podium, sparked by Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, a Marine I personally pulled from a burning vehicle in Fallujah 15 years ago. It spread through the formation like wildfire, from the veterans who'd served under me in Iraq to the newest privates who'd only heard the stories. My aide, Colonel Thompson, leaned in. "Should I restore order, ma'am?" "Let them finish," I said quietly. "They've earned the right." Because these weren't just Marines. They were my Marines, and every single one of them knew that the papers I filed had brought them home alive. Growing up as the daughter of Master Sergeant Carlos Martinez, retired, meant growing up in the shadow of a very specific kind of Marine. My father was Old Corps through and through, a Vietnam veteran who believed real Marines were defined by physical prowess, loud voices, and the ability to break things professionally. I was none of those things. Where my brothers Diego and Miguel were built like linebackers, I was small and wiry. Where they excelled at sports and roughhousing, I excelled at mathematics and strategic thinking. Where they could do 100 push-ups without breaking a sweat, I could dismantle complex problems and see patterns others missed. Sophia's got a good head on her shoulders, my father would tell his Marine buddies, but she's not built for the course. Too small, too quiet, better suited for office work. He'd say it affectionately, like he was protecting me from disappointment. But each time, it cut a little deeper. The message was clear. Real Marines looked like my brothers. Real Marines were loud and physical. Real Marines were not bookish daughters who solved puzzles for fun and preferred chess to football. So when I announced at 18 that I'd been accepted to the Naval Academy with a Marine Corps contract, he'd laughed. Actually laughed. "Maija," he'd said, still chuckling, "the Corps isn't summer camp. You can't think your way through boot camp. Why don't you consider the Air Force? They need smart people behind desks." But I went anyway, graduated top of my class at Annapolis. Survived the basic school not through brute strength but through tactics, endurance, and outthinking every challenge. When others relied on muscle, I relied on strategy. When they powered through obstacles, I found efficient solutions. My father attended my commissioning, stood in the crowd as I took my oath as a 2nd lieutenant. But afterward, at the reception, I heard him telling his cousin, "She'll probably end up in administration. Somewhere safe, filing paperwork. That's better anyway. The real Marines, the fighters, they need good support staff." Support staff. Even as I pinned on my gold bars, even as I prepared to lead Marines in combat, he saw me as support staff. So I stopped trying to convince him otherwise. I deployed to Iraq in 2003 as an intelligence officer, but let him believe I spent my time in air-conditioned offices. When I earned my first Bronze Star for developing a signals intelligence program that prevented dozens of IED attacks, I told him it was for administrative excellence. When I made captain and took command of a company in Anbar province, I let him think it was a desk job. The truth was far different. The truth was that I spent my nights analyzing patterns in enemy activity, developing predictive models that kept my Marines one step ahead of insurgents. The truth was that my paperwork included operational plans that saved lives, intelligence assessments that prevented ambushes, and tactical innovations that changed how the Marine Corps fought urban warfare. But the real truth, the one that would have shocked my traditional father, was that I didn't just file papers. I led from the front. The turning point came in Ramadi, 2006. I was a major by then, serving as operations officer for 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. The city was hell on earth, IEDs on every corner, snipers in every window, death waiting behind every door. One night, our intel suggested a high-value target in a compound on the east side. The battalion commander wanted to send a rifle company, but something in the intelligence pattern bothered me. I spent hours poring over signals intercepts, satellite imagery, patrol reports. And then I saw it, the setup. The target was bait. The real ambush was waiting for our reaction force. I tried to explain, but time was running out. The colonel was under pressure from higher to act on the intel, so I did something that would define my career. I volunteered to lead a small reconnaissance team to verify the intelligence personally. Major Martinez, the colonel said slowly, "You're an intel officer. Your place is here, analyzing." "With respect, sir, my place is wherever I can best protect Marines. And right now, that's on the ground, preventing a massacre." I took 6 volunteers, Marines who trusted my instincts despite my reputation as a desk officer. We moved through the dark streets of Ramadi like ghosts, using routes I'd memorized from hundreds of hours of map study. When we reached the compound, my suspicions were confirmed. The high-value target was a mannequin. The buildings surrounding our planned assault route were packed with insurgents and explosives. We called in the trap's location. Artillery reduced the ambush sites to rubble. The rifle company that would have walked into a death trap instead swept through to find nothing but destroyed enemy positions and dead insurgents. 37 Marines went home to their families because I'd refused to just file papers. Word spread. The quiet intel major who'd personally led a recon team into the deadliest city in Iraq. The officer who'd risked her career and life because she'd seen something others missed. Suddenly, Marines looked at me differently, not as support staff, but as a leader who put their lives above protocol. But I never told my father. When I came home on leave, he'd ask about my deployment and I'd talk about reports and analysis. He'd nod knowingly and change the subject to Diego's exploits as an infantry officer or Miguel's selection for force recon. "At least you're safe," he'd say. "Let your brothers do the dangerous stuff. You keep filing those papers, Major." The years passed, captain to major to lieutenant colonel. Each rank brought more responsibility, more Marines under my command, more operations where intelligence and tactics merged into something revolutionary. I pioneered new ways of fighting, using data analysis to predict enemy movements, developing algorithms that identified IED patterns, creating intelligence-driven operations that minimized casualties while maximizing effectiveness. In Afghanistan, as a colonel commanding a regiment, I implemented what became known as the Martinez method, a fusion of traditional Marine aggression with surgical intelligence precision. We'd strike where the enemy was weakest, avoid where they were strongest, always staying 3 steps ahead through careful analysis of patterns others dismissed as random. My Marines started calling me the prophet because I seemed to predict enemy actions before they happened. What they didn't see were the 18-hour days spent analyzing data, the countless scenarios gamed out on paper, the mathematical models that turned chaos into predictable patterns. But the best part, the part that would have baffled my traditional father, was that I never asked my Marines to do anything I wouldn't do myself. When the intelligence pointed to danger, I led from the front. When the analysis suggested an opportunity, I was first through the door. I earned their respect not through volume or physical dominance, but through competence and courage. They followed me not because I could do more pull-ups, I couldn't, but because I could see the battlefield in ways that kept them alive. By the time I pinned on my first star as a brigadier general, I'd served in every major combat operation of the past 2 decades. My methods had been studied at the War College, implemented across the course, credited with saving hundreds of lives. But to my father, I was still his quiet daughter who probably had a nice safe desk job somewhere. Yesterday had been typical. I'd flown home for my nephew's graduation from boot camp, Diego's son, following in the family tradition. At the celebration dinner, my father held court as always, telling stories about real Marines while I sat quietly at the end of the table. Tio Carlos, one of the young cousins, asked, "What does Tia Sofia do in the Marines?" My father waved dismissively. "Oh, she works at some base administration, I think. Probably files papers, handles logistics, that kind of thing." He smiled at me condescendingly. "Important work, keeping us fighters supplied, right, Maija?" I'd simply nodded. "Something like that, Dad." He'd already turned back to his audience. "Now let me tell you about the time your cousin Miguel fast wrote from a helicopter in Afghanistan." What he didn't know was that today, I was taking command of the 1st Marine Division, 20,000 Marines, the most storied division in the course, and they'd chosen me to lead them. The quiet daughter who filed papers would be responsible for the very fighters my father idolized. I hadn't told him about the ceremony, just mentioned I had a work thing to attend at Camp Pendleton. He barely looked up from his beer. "Well, don't let us keep you from your paperwork," he'd said, getting another laugh from the table. Now, standing on the parade ground with those same 20,000 Marines chanting my name, I wondered what he was thinking. The ceremony had been broadcast live on the base channel. Someone in the family would have seen it, would have called him, would have said, "Carlos, isn't Ed Sofia on TV?" The chanting finally died down as Command Sergeant Major Williams called the formation to order. I stepped to the microphone, looking out at the sea of dress blues. "Marines," I began, my voice carrying across the parade ground without shouting. Another thing that would have surprised my father. "You honor me with your welcome, but the honor has always been mine, to serve alongside you, to lead you, to bring you home." A murmur of approval rippled through the ranks. "They call me the prophet," I continued, allowing a small smile. "But there's no magic to what I do, no crystal ball. Just careful analysis, detailed planning, and the fundamental belief that every Marine life is precious. That every risk must be calculated. That every decision must be weighed against the cost in blood." I paused, meeting eyes across the formation. "Some of you served with me in Ramadi, where we turned intelligence into ammunition. Others in Helmand, where we proved that brains and bullets together are unstoppable. Many of you know the Martinez method not from textbooks, but from living it. Striking smart, moving fast, staying alive." Nods throughout the formation. These Marines knew. "But what you may not know," I said, my voice softening, "is that every operation I planned, every risk I calculated, every decision I made, was guided by a simple principle my father taught me, even if he didn't know it." I saw the press cameras zoom in, sensed the crowd leaning forward. "He told me I was too small to be a real Marine, too quiet, better suited for paperwork than fighting." I smiled. He was right about the paperwork. I filed a lot of papers. Operations orders that dismantled insurgent networks. Intelligence reports that prevented ambushes. Casualty reports that, thank God, stayed shorter because we fought smarter. A few Marines laughed, understanding. So yes, I filed papers. I analyzed data. I solved puzzles. And I turn all of that into operations that bring Marines home alive. That's not traditional Marine Corps leadership. But then again, I looked directly at the camera, knowing my father would see this. Traditions evolve. The Corps evolves. And sometimes the smallest, quietest Marine in the family becomes the one standing in front of a division. The formation erupted again, this time in organized aura that shook the ground. As the ceremony concluded and I made my way through the receiving line, my aide appeared at my elbow. "General, you have a visitor in your office. Says he's your father." I found him standing by the window, still in the same clothes from last night's dinner. He looked older, somehow smaller. When he turned, his eyes were red. "Sophia," he said, then caught himself. "General Martinez." "Dad," I said simply. He stood there, struggling for words. This man who'd never been at a loss for opinions, who'd spent my entire life explaining what real Marines looked like, couldn't speak. "Finally, the news is saying you're the most decorated female Marine in history." "I'm one of the most decorated Marines, period," I corrected gently. "Gender doesn't matter when you're calling in fire support." He nodded slowly. "They showed your record. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Operations I've never heard of." He paused. "Classified operations." "Yes. You weren't filing papers." "I was, just different papers than you imagined." He moved to my desk, where my awards were displayed. Navy Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Stars with Combat V Purple Heart. His fingers hovered over them like they were holy relics. "You were shot?" he whispered, touching the Purple Heart. "Twice, Fallujah and Helmand. But you never said. You never asked Dad. You decided who I was the day I joined. Too small, too quiet, destined for desk work. Every time I came home, you'd already written my story. So I stopped trying to correct it." He sank into a chair. "I failed you." "No," I said, sitting across from him. "You motivated me. Every time you said I wasn't built for the real Marine Corps, I worked harder to prove, not to you, but to myself, that there's more than one way to be a warrior. 500 Marines, he said quietly. They chanted your name. My buddies from the VFA were there. They saw their sons, their grandsons cheering for you like, he struggled for words, like you were their hero. I'm not their hero, Dad. I'm their general. There's a difference. He looked at me then, really looked, perhaps for the first time. Tell me, he said. Tell me what I missed. Tell me who you really are. So I did. For the next 2 hours, I told him about Ramadi and Fallujah, about leading Marines through hell and bringing them back, about turning intelligence into action, analysis into victory, about the papers I filed that were written in sweat and blood. When I finished, he was crying, something I'd seen only once before, at my mother's funeral. I'm so sorry, Mindja, he whispered. I was so busy looking for Marines who looked like me that I missed the one who surpassed me. Dad. Now let me say this. He straightened his back. I spent 40 years in the course. Fought in Vietnam. Thought I knew what a Marine looked like. He met my eyes. I was wrong. A Marine looks like someone who brings other Marines home. A Marine looks like someone who fights smart, not just hard. A Marine looks like you. There was a knock on the door. Colonel Thompson entered. Sorry to interrupt, General, but the division staff is assembled for your initial briefing. I stood. I'll be right there. My father stood too. Sophia, General, would you mind if I stayed? If I watched you work? I'd like to see what filing papers really means. I considered it. Having him shadow me would be unusual, potentially disruptive. But I saw something in his eyes, not just pride or regret, but genuine curiosity about the daughter he'd never truly known. Grab a seat in the back, I said. And Dad, try not to look too shocked when you see me in action. The briefing room was packed with field-grade officers, maps covering every wall, screens displaying real-time intelligence from around the globe. As I entered, 30 Marines snapped to attention. As you were, I said, moving to the front. Let's start with the Pacific Theater assessments. For the next 3 hours, I demonstrated what filing papers really meant, analyzing threats across multiple countries, coordinating with intelligence agencies, planning operations that wouldn't make headlines but would prevent conflicts, making decisions that would affect thousands of Marines and potentially millions of civilians. I turned data into strategy, reports into action plans, papers into the complex machinery of modern warfare. And through it all, I felt my father's eyes on me, watching his quiet daughter command a room full of warriors with nothing more than competence and clarity. When it ended, as the staff filed out, he approached slowly. I understood maybe half of that, he admitted. But I understood enough. You're not just a Marine, Sophia. You're the future of the Marine Corps. No, Dad, I'm the present. The Corps has always had Marines like me, thinkers, planners, the ones who multiply force through intelligence. We just didn't fit your image, so you didn't see us. He nodded. Will you? Could you forgive a stubborn old Marine? Could we start over? I smiled. Aura, Dad, Aura. That night, at another family dinner, this one impromptu, called by my father, he stood before the assembled relatives and friends. I need to tell you all something, he began. For 20 years, I've been telling you that Sophia worked in administration, filed papers, stayed safe while real Marines did the fighting. He paused, voice thick with emotion. I was wrong. Sophia, General Martinez, has been in more combat than me and her brothers combined. She saved more lives through her intelligence work than any Marine I know. Those papers she files, they're operational plans that have brought entire battalions home alive. He turned to me. I told people you weren't built for the real Marine Corps. The truth is, the Marine Corps is lucky to be built around Marines like you. The room was silent. Then Diego, my brother who'd always been Dad's favorite warrior, started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Miguel joined. Then cousins, aunts, uncles, until the small dining room thundered with applause. Later, as the evening wound down, my father pulled me aside. That chant today, he said. Those Marines, they love you. They trust me, I corrected. Love is earned through shared hardship. Trust is earned through competence. I'll take trust. He smiled, a real smile, free of condescension. You know what? You're right, trust is harder to earn. He paused. I trust you, General, and I'm proud to be your father. As I drove back to Pendleton that night, I thought about the journey from the quiet girl deemed unfit for the course to the general commanding its most storied division. My father had been right about one thing. I wasn't a traditional Marine. I was something more. I was proof that strength comes in many forms, that warriors don't all look the same, that sometimes the most powerful thing a Marine can do is think before they shoot. Tomorrow, I'd be back at my desk, filing papers that would become operations, that would become victories, that would become Marines coming home to their families. And for the first time in my career, my father would understand that those papers weren't just administration. They were ammunition, and I was one hell of a marksman.
The fluorescent lights of the hospital room hummed, casting a sterile glow on everything. I was 18 when I got pregnant, and now at 19, I was holding my son, Eli, for the first time. He was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a full head of dark hair, and skin the colour of warm caramel. My heart swelled, a feeling so immense it almost hurt. I was exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones, but looking at him, nothing else mattered. Then my mother, Penelope, walked in. She was 47, always impeccably dressed, even for a hospital visit. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her expression, usually a mask of polite control, was off. She approached the bassinet, her eyes scanning Eli, then me, then Eli again. "Vivian," she said, her voice tight, not the soft coo I'd expected. "He's quite dark, isn't he?" I frowned, pulling the thin blanket higher around Eli. "He's got my hair, Mum." "And Archer's nose." Archer Sutton, Eli's father, was 23, an old high school flame who had been thrilled about the pregnancy, at least initially. Penelope didn't even glance at me. Her gaze was fixed on Eli's tiny face. "He can't be yours, not with skin like that." The words hit me like a physical blow. The air left my lungs. My brain, already fuzzy from labour and lack of sleep, struggled to process them. Not with skin like that? What was she even talking about? I was half black myself, though my skin was lighter, more like hers. My father, who had passed away when I was little, was black. My mother was white. This wasn't exactly a secret. "Mum, what are you saying?" I managed, my voice a whisper. She finally looked at me, her blue eyes cold and hard. "You know exactly what I'm saying, Vivian. Archer is white. Our family is white. This colour isn't from us." The implication hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. She was accusing me of cheating, of lying, of bringing a child into the world that didn't fit her perfect, pristine image of our family. My postpartum body ached, my head throbbed, and the betrayal was a sharp, searing pain. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. I just held Eli tighter, shielding him from her gaze. The tension in the house, once we were home, became a living, breathing thing. Every glance from Penelope felt like an accusation. Every silence was heavy with unspoken judgment. She started making veiled comments, loud enough for me to hear from the living room, about untrustworthy people and family honour. The phone calls started almost immediately. I'd hear her on the phone, her voice hushed, then suddenly louder, a performative sigh. "Oh, it's just been so difficult, you know. Vivian, she's just been so confused lately." The rumours spread like wildfire through our extended family. I started getting texts from cousins, aunts, and even some of my mother's friends. Nothing direct, of course, just passive-aggressive questions about Archer, or comments like, "Are you sure about the father, honey? Sometimes these things happen." I was called a liar, a tramp, untrustworthy. It was all Penelope's doing. I knew it. She was orchestrating this smear campaign, painting me as a reckless, deceitful girl who had somehow brought shame upon the Quinn name. I was stunned, yes, but more than that, I was just so tired. The exhaustion was a constant companion, a heavy blanket that muffled my thoughts and dulled my reactions. Eli was a demanding newborn, and every feeding, every diaper change, every moment of his tiny, fragile existence felt like a monumental effort. Defending myself felt impossible. One evening, a few days after we'd come home, I was trying to soothe Eli in the nursery. He was fussy, and I was swaying back and forth, humming softly, when I heard my mother's voice from the hallway, hushed but clear. She was on the phone, probably with her cousin Delilah. "There's no way that boy's from this family," she whispered, her voice laced with venom. This is shame." The whisper of my mother's voice, This is shame," echoed in the nursery long after she'd moved away from the door. Eli finally drifted off to sleep in my arms, his tiny chest rising and falling with soft breaths. I laid him in his bassinet, the anger and hurt from her words battling with the crushing weight of postpartum exhaustion. It had been about 2 weeks since we come home from the hospital, and the atmosphere was thick with Penelope's silent judgment. Every creak of the floorboards, every door closing, felt like a deliberate act against me. A few days later, my Aunt Jennifer, Penelope's sister-in-law, was hosting a small birthday party for her daughter, my cousin Amy, who had just turned 17. I decided to go. I needed to see other family members, to feel like part of something normal. Maybe, I thought, if I just explained it, they'd understand. Maybe they weren't all buying into Penelope's narrative. I dressed Eli in a tiny blue romper, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my stomach. When we arrived, the house was buzzing with laughter and chatter, but as soon as I walked in, a hush fell over the living room. Smiles, previously wide and genuine, tightened into forced, uncomfortable grins. "Vivienne, so good to see you," Aunt Jennifer said, her voice a little too bright. She hugged me quickly, then peered at Eli in his carrier. "Oh, he's healthy." Her eyes darted to Penelope, who was standing across the room, watching us with a satisfied smirk. I tried. I really did. Later, when I was sitting on the couch holding Eli, my cousin Amy came over, her eyes wide with curiosity. She was the only one who seemed genuinely interested in Eli, cooing at him softly. But when I saw my Aunt Jennifer approaching, I thought, this is my chance. "Aunt Jennifer," I started, keeping my voice low. "Mum's been saying some really awful things about Eli, about me. She thinks I cheated on Archer because of Eli's skin colour, but it's ridiculous. You know my dad was black, right? It's genetics. It's just how it works." Jennifer's smile faltered. She glanced around, as if afraid someone would overhear. "Oh, Vivienne, honey," she said, patting my knee. "Let's not get into that today. It's Amy's birthday. We just want to celebrate." Her eyes, usually so warm, were clouded with discomfort. She quickly moved away, joining a group of women by the snack table, their heads immediately turning towards me. It was like hitting a wall. Every attempt to explain, to defend myself, was met with the same forced smiles and quick changes of topic. "Let's not get into that. We're praying for you." Such a sensitive topic. The message was clear. They didn't want to hear it. They had already made up their minds, or they were too afraid to cross Penelope. Over the next few weeks, the isolation intensified. My phone, once filled with casual family group chats, grew quiet. Invitations to family dinners and gatherings started getting lost in the mail, or I'd only hear about them days after they'd happened, through a vague social media post. My inbox, however, was far from empty. It filled with screenshots of family gossip from private group chats I'd been removed from, sent by anonymous numbers or distant cousins too cowardly to confront me directly. Cryptic texts would pop up, like, "We're praying for you, Vivienne," or "God has a plan for everything." Each one felt like a tiny cut, reminding me that I was being talked about, judged, and ostracized. And Archer? He was gone. After the initial hospital visit, where he'd seemed genuinely happy, he'd started making excuses. First, he was busy with work. Then, he had a family emergency. Then, nothing. My calls went straight to voicemail. My texts went unanswered. He'd ghosted me completely, leaving me to face this onslaught alone. He was 23, old enough to know better, but clearly not old enough to stand up for his son. The walls truly started to close in. Psychologically, emotionally, I felt trapped. My own mother, the person who should have been my biggest offender, was my primary tormentor. But beneath the exhaustion and despair, a tiny spark of defiance began to glow. I couldn't let this stand, not for me, but for Eli. He deserved to know his heritage, to be loved unconditionally. I started spending my nights, after Eli was asleep, hunched over my laptop, researching. DNA testing. It was the obvious answer. If my mother was so convinced, then science would prove her wrong. I read reviews, compared companies, and finally ordered a kit. It felt like a lifeline. A week later, the first kit arrived. I followed the instructions carefully, swabbed my cheek, then Eli's. I sealed the envelopes, filled out the forms, and mailed them off, a flicker of hope igniting in my chest. This would be it. This would shut her up. A few weeks later, the results came in the mail. A thick envelope, official-looking, addressed to me. I was so eager, my hands trembled as I opened it. I scanned the first page, my eyes searching for the key phrases. Yes! Yes! I was about to rush to Penelope to shove the paper in her face when I heard her coming down the stairs. I quickly tucked the results under a stack of magazines on the coffee table. Penelope walked into the living room, her eyes narrowed. She picked up the magazines, seemingly at random, and the envelope slipped out. She saw the company logo, the return address. Her lips thinned. Without a word, without even opening it, she crumpled the envelope and its contents into a tight ball. Then, with a deliberate, almost theatrical motion, she walked to the kitchen trash can and dropped it in. The sound of the paper hitting the bottom of the can was sickeningly final. Penelope trashing the first DNA test result was a turning point. It wasn't just dismissive, it was an act of pure, unadulterated contempt for the truth. It solidified something in me. This wasn't about her being mistaken or ignorant. This was about her refusing to acknowledge something she clearly found deeply offensive. Eli was almost 2 months old now, a tiny, innocent bundle who cooed and gurgled, oblivious to the war being waged over his very existence. My exhaustion was still profound, but it was now laced with a cold, clear determination. If one test wasn't enough, I'd get 6. I ordered 5 more DNA kits from different companies: Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA, and Living DNA. I wanted an undeniable, overwhelming consensus. Over the next few weeks, my nights were a blur of swabbing Eli's cheek, then mine, carefully packaging samples, and meticulously tracking shipping dates and expected result times. Each kit cost money I didn't really have, but I considered it an investment in Eli's future, a down payment on his right to know who he was. The results started trickling in. First, Ancestry DNA. Then, 23andMe. Then the others, one by one. Each report, in its own way, confirmed the same thing. Eli was my son. And crucially, the genetic markers for my own mixed heritage were clearly present in both our profiles. My black ancestry, which my mother seemed so determined to ignore in me, was undeniably passed to Eli. There was no denying the connection, no denying the lineage. I didn't just look at them, I documented everything. I took high-resolution screenshots of every page of every online report. I photocopied the physical reports that came in the mail. I created a dedicated email folder for all correspondence from the DNA companies. Then, I bought a thick 3-ring binder. I labelled it simply, Eli's Truth. Inside, I organised everything: the screenshots of the family gossip texts, the dates they were sent, my own timeline of Penelope's increasingly hostile behaviour, and then, page after page, the DNA test results. 6 different companies, 6 different sets of data, all pointing to the same irrefutable conclusion. Once I had everything compiled, I printed out a fresh copy of the most comprehensive report, the one from Ancestry DNA, and addressed an envelope to Penelope. I didn't say a word when I placed it on her bedside table one morning, right next to her reading glasses. Later that day, I heard her scoff from her room. "Science gets things wrong," she muttered, loud enough for me to hear. "Anyone can buy these things online. They're not reliable." The sheer audacity of her denial, faced with overwhelming evidence, was breathtaking, but it also confirmed my growing suspicion. She wasn't just ignorant, she was actively, deliberately lying. And not just to me, but to herself and to everyone else. The question became, why? What was she so desperate to hide? I started journaling for Eli, not just about the DNA tests, but about everything. About how much I loved him, how brave he was for just existing, for being the catalyst for all this. I wrote about the pain, the isolation, the feeling of fighting alone. I wrote about Penelope's words, her coldness, her calculated cruelty. It was a way to process, to vent, and to create a permanent record for him, should he ever need to understand what happened. I kept the journal hidden, tucked away in my sock drawer. My days revolved around Eli's needs, but my nights were dedicated to my quiet investigation. I'd scroll through old family photos on my phone, searching for clues, for anything that might explain Penelope's bizarre reaction. I looked at pictures of my deceased father, trying to see if there was something in his lineage I'd missed, something that would make Eli's skin colour a surprise to my mother. But there was nothing. It just didn't add up. One afternoon, about 3 months after Eli was born, I was looking for some of my old baby clothes that Penelope had kept, thinking they might fit Eli now. She'd mentioned they were in an upstairs storage closet, the one that also had the pull-down stairs to the attic. I found the closet easily enough, but the clothes weren't there. Instead, tucked high up in the rafters of the attic opening, almost out of sight, was a large, heavy cardboard box. It was old, faded, and looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Scrawled across the top, in thick black marker, were 2 words that sent a chill down my spine. "Do not open." The words "do not open" practically glowed in the dim light of the storage closet. It wasn't just a warning. It felt like a challenge. Eli was almost 3 months old now, and the silence in the house, broken only by Penelope's pointed sighs and my son's innocent gurgles, was suffocating. My mother was out for the afternoon, probably at one of her bridge club meetings or charity lunches, meticulously maintaining her image in the community. This was my chance. I pulled the attic stairs down, the old wood groaning in protest. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light, filtering through a small, grimy window. The air in the attic was stale and thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten things. I climbed up, careful not to disturb anything, and reached for the box. It was heavier than I expected, bound with twine that had long since frayed. I carried it down, my heart pounding with a mix of trepidation and anticipation, and placed it gently on the floor of the storage closet. I debated bringing it to my room, but decided against it. If Penelope came home unexpectedly, she might check my room. The closet was safer, more discreet. I knelt down and, with trembling fingers, untied the brittle twine. The lid creaked open, releasing a puff of dust and that same old paper smell. The first thing I saw was a stack of letters, tied with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, looping, and unfamiliar. I picked one up. The ink was faint, but I could make out dates from the late 1960s. Underneath the letters were photographs, dozens of them, loose and yellowed with age. I picked up the top photo. It was a black and white snapshot of a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, with long, dark hair and a bright, open smile. She looked familiar. Then it hit me. It was Penelope, but not the Penelope I knew, not the severe, controlled woman who was my mother. This Penelope was vibrant, carefree, and standing beside her, his arm casually around her waist, was a black man. He was tall, with a kind face and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was handsome, and his skin was the colour of rich earth. My breath hitched. My mother, with a black man. My mother who had just spent 3 months denying my son's black heritage, who had called his skin colour shame. I sifted through more photos. Penelope and the man laughing, Penelope and the man holding hands, Penelope and the man with a small child, a little girl who looked uncannily like a younger version of my mother. My mind raced. This had to be her father, my grandfather. The one she never spoke about, the one I'd always been told was white, a distant relative from a prominent family. Then I found it. Tucked beneath a pile of old postcards was a birth certificate. I unfolded it carefully. The name at the top was clear. Penelope Marie Edwards. Not Quinn. Edwards. Her birth date was listed as September 15th, 1976. Her father's name, Leonard Davis. Her mother's name, Clara Edwards. Leonard Davis, the black man in the photos, my biological grandfather. My mother had changed her name. She had erased her past, erased him. As I continued to dig, I found more. A small, leather-bound diary, its pages filled with neat cursive script. I flipped through it, recognizing Penelope's handwriting. It was from her late teens, early 20s. Entries about Leonard, about keeping secrets, about passing. The word passing jumped out at me, chilling me to the bone. Then, a single folded piece of paper. It was a letter, brittle and worn. The handwriting was different, shaky, but the words were stark. Penelope, it read, "If they find out, it's over. Everything we've worked for. Your father, he made his choices. Don't you make the same mistake. You are a Quinn now. You are white. If they find out about Leonard, about them, it's over." It was signed, Mother, Penelope's mother, my white grandmother who had apparently orchestrated this entire charade. I felt a strange mix of horror and vindication. The pieces were slotting into place, forming a picture far more twisted than I could have imagined. My mother wasn't just a racist. She was a self-hating woman who had built her entire identity on a lie. She had denied her own heritage, her own father, and then projected that shame onto me and my innocent son. Eli's skin colour wasn't a surprise to her. It was a mirror, reflecting the truth she had buried for decades. As I carefully placed the documents back into the box, making sure to remember the order, a single loose photograph fluttered out from between the pages of the diary. It was a Polaroid, slightly blurry but unmistakable. Penelope, much younger, maybe 17 or 18, her face round with pregnancy. And behind her, a large Greyhound-style bus, its destination sign clearly visible. Seller County, GA. Seller County, Georgia. I had never heard of it. And Penelope, pregnant in her late teens. My mother had always told me she met my father, David Quinn, in college, when she was 21. She said they married shortly after. But this photo was from years before that. And the bus, the location. A new terrifying thought bloomed in my mind. If Penelope had lied about her own father, if she had lied about her own identity, what else had she lied about? Was Vivian's father not who she was told he was? The Polaroid of a pregnant Penelope in front of the Sealer County GA bus haunted me. Eli was now just over 3 months old, and the weight of this new, horrifying possibility settled heavily on my shoulders. My mother, Penelope, had built her entire life on a foundation of lies, and now it seemed my own identity might be part of that elaborate deception. I remembered seeing the name Delilah Davis in some of the old letters in the box, Penelope's estranged cousin. She was Penelope's age, 44, and I vaguely recalled hearing her name mentioned years ago, always with a sniff or a dismissive wave from my mother. Estranged meant she might be willing to talk. It was a long shot, but I had to try. It took some digging, but I found Delilah's number through an old family directory I remembered my grandmother, Penelope's mother, keeping. My heart hammered as I dialed. "Hello?" a cautious voice answered. "Hi, my name is Vivian Quinn," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Penelope's daughter." There was a long silence on the other end. "Penelope's daughter? Well, this is a surprise. What can I do for you, Vivian?" Her tone was wary, but not hostile. I found some old family documents," I began, choosing my words carefully. "Letters, photos. They mention a Leonard Davis, and a Penelope Edwards. Another silence, longer this time. Then a sigh. So, she finally let the cat out of the bag, did she? Delilah's voice was softer now, tinged with a weary sadness. Or did you find it yourself? I found it, I admitted. In a box, in the attic. It seems my mother isn't who she says she is, and that my grandfather, Leonard Davis, was black. That's right, Delilah confirmed, her voice low. Our family, the Davis side, has always been biracial. My grandmother, Clara, was white, but her husband, Leonard, was black. It was an open secret in our part of the family, the ones who didn't try to pass. But Penelope, she was always obsessed with image. Our grandmother, Clara, pushed her hard to hide it, to marry into a good white family and erase her past. For safety, for respectability, as they called it back then. But it was just shame, Vivian. Pure shame. My stomach churned. She changed her name. She never told me about any of this. She's been saying Eli can't be from our family because of his skin. She's been calling me a liar. I know, Delilah said, her voice full of sympathy. I heard the whispers. Penelope's always been like that. She cut off anyone who reminded her of her past. That's why we haven't spoken in years. She wanted to be a Quinn, a white Quinn, and she didn't want any loose ends. Then I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since I found the Polaroid. Delilah, did Penelope ever live in Sealer County, Georgia, when she was younger? And do you know anything about my father? My mother always said he was David Quinn, that they met in college. Delilah paused, and I could hear her take a deep breath. Vivian, I don't know about your father specifically. That was Penelope's secret to keep. But yes, she did spend some time in Sealer County, Georgia, right before she met David Quinn. She lived with her aunt for a bit. There were rumours, but I never knew the details. She came back, married David, and that was that. She never looked back. My heart sank. So the possibility was real. My father might not be David Quinn. My mother, Penelope, had not only erased her own identity, but possibly mine as well. The conversation with Delilah was a turning point. It wasn't just about Penelope's hypocrisy anymore. It was about the profound, generational trauma of denied identity. I thanked Delilah, my voice thick with emotion, and hung up. The next few days were a blur of furious, methodical work. Eli was now 4 months old, starting to smile and grab at things, a constant reminder of why I was doing this. I went back to the attic box, carefully laying out every letter, every photograph, every document. I borrowed a high-resolution scanner from a friend and spent hours meticulously scanning everything. Every faded ink mark, every crease in the paper, every detail of every photo was captured digitally. I didn't just scan. I enhanced, sharpened, and restored what I could. The burned photo Penelope had in the last chapter, I knew it was in there somewhere. I focused on the one that showed her and Leonard Davis together, the one that looked like it had been torn and pieced back together. I worked on it until it was as clear as it could be. I cross-referenced dates, names, and locations. I built a comprehensive timeline of Penelope's life, highlighting every instance of her erasure of identity, the name change, the hidden photos, the denials of her black heritage, the lies about my father. I printed out the 6 DNA test results again, clear and undeniable. I had everything. Then I started preparing the packages. I bought dozens of manila envelopes and addressed them to every key member of our extended family. Aunt Jennifer, my other aunts and uncles, cousins, even some of Penelope's closest friends, who I knew she had gossiped to. Each packet would contain a curated selection of the most damning evidence. One evening, as I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of paper and envelopes, there was a quiet knock on the back door. I opened it to find Amy, my 17-year-old cousin, standing there, looking nervous. She was holding a small, brightly coloured blanket. "Hey, Vivian," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. I wanted to see Eli, and I brought him this." She handed me the blanket, her eyes darting around the kitchen. I let her in, my heart softening. She was the only one who had shown any real kindness. She went straight to Eli's bassinet, her face lighting up as she gently touched his hand. Then she turned back to me, her voice barely audible. Grandma said she'd disown me if I asked questions, but I think it's time. Amy's whispered words. Grandma said she'd disown me if I asked questions, but I think it's time, were like a jolt of electricity. Eli was now 4 months old, a bright, curious baby who was starting to notice the world around him. Having Amy, my 17-year-old cousin, on my side, even covertly, felt like a small victory in the silent war I was waging. I gave her a grateful smile. "Amy," I said, keeping my voice low, "I'm glad you're here. I'm about to do something big, something that will explain everything." She nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. I didn't go into all the details right then, but her presence, her quiet support, fueled my resolve. Over the next few days, I worked with a focused intensity. Penelope was still maintaining her icy distance, spending most of her time out of the house or sequestered in her room. This gave me the space I needed. I finalized the evidence packets. Each manila envelope was carefully curated, tailored slightly depending on the recipient's relationship to Penelope and their place in the family hierarchy. For Aunt Jennifer Quinn White, my mother's sister-in-law, who had given me the "let's not get into that line at Amy's birthday party," I included the most damning evidence. Her packet contained 1. A printout of all 6 DNA test results, clearly showing Eli's genetic connection to me and my own undeniable mixed heritage. 2. High-resolution scans of Penelope's original birth certificate, showing her birth name as Penelope Marie Edwards and her father as Leonard Davis. 3. Photos of a young Penelope with Leonard Davis, her black father, including the one I had painstakingly restored from its damaged state. This was the one I knew Penelope had tried to burn decades ago. 4. Scans of the threatening letter from Penelope's mother, Clara, warning her about the consequences if they find out. 5. A concise bullet-point timeline I had created, detailing Penelope's name change, her calculated erasure of her past, and her subsequent campaign against me and Eli. 6. And finally, a copy of the blurry Polaroid of a pregnant Penelope in front of the Seller County GA bus. No explanation, just the photo? Let them wonder. For other relatives, like my mother's other sister-in-law, Amy's mother, and various cousins, the packets were slightly less comprehensive, but still contained enough to paint a clear picture. The DNA results, the birth certificate, and a selection of the photos, particularly those of Penelope with Leonard Davis, were included in every single one. I didn't include any personal letters or diary entries, as I wanted to focus on undeniable facts and visual proof. My goal wasn't to expose every intimate detail of Penelope's life, but to dismantle the lies she had built her public image upon. I sealed each envelope, writing the recipient's name clearly on the front. I had a list of dozens of family members, some I barely knew, but all connected to Penelope's carefully constructed world. I didn't include a letter from myself. The evidence spoke for itself. Over 2 separate days, I drove to different post offices in neighbouring towns, dropping off batches of envelopes. I didn't want to send them all from the same place, just in case. It felt clandestine, but necessary. Each drop-off felt like a small act of defiance, a quiet revolution. Then, I waited. The responses started trickling in within days. First, the silence from some, then the shocked texts. My phone buzzed constantly. "Vivian, what is this? Is this real?" From a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. My mind is blown. I always wondered why she never wanted to talk about our real grandpa. This one was from a cousin on my father's side, who had always seemed a bit more open-minded. Crying emojis. From another aunt, who had initially sided with Penelope. "I need to talk to you, immediately." From Aunt Jennifer. Some messages were accusatory, demanding to know why I would do such a thing. Others were apologetic, expressing regret for believing Penelope's lies. The family network, once a tightly controlled web of Penelope's making, was now buzzing with chaos and confusion. The truth, carefully documented and delivered, was ripping through it. I watched Penelope closely. She seemed oblivious, still moving through the house with her usual air of superiority. The envelopes were delivered to the mailboxes, not directly to her hands. She wouldn't know until the calls started or until someone confronted her. One evening, about a week after the first batch of envelopes had been mailed, I was in the kitchen making Eli's formula. Eli, at almost 5 months, was starting to roll over, and I was trying to keep one eye on him in his playpen while I mixed the powder. The house was quiet. Penelope had just come home. I heard her footsteps in the hallway, then the distinct sound of the mail slot opening and closing. She walked into the kitchen, her usual composed expression on her face. She placed a small stack of bills and junk mail on the empty kitchen table, and then I saw it. Tucked beneath the bills, a single manila envelope. It was addressed to her, in my neat block handwriting. Her name, Penelope Davis Quinn, stood out starkly. She picked it up, her brow furrowing slightly. She opened it, her fingers tearing at the flap. I held my breath, watching her. Her eyes scanned the contents, and then she froze. Her face, usually so carefully controlled, crumpled. Her eyes widened, her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. She was looking at a photograph, the one I had painstakingly restored. A photo she had burned decades ago, a photo of her, young and smiling, standing beside her black father, Leonard Davis. The restored photo, a ghost from her past, was finally back to haunt her. Penelope stood frozen in the kitchen, the restored photograph of her and Leonard Davis clutched in her hand. Eli, now almost 5 months old, let out a happy gurgle from his playpen, oblivious to the silent earthquake shaking our house. My mother's face was a mask of utter devastation, a raw, exposed vulnerability I had never seen before. Her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were wide and unfocused, staring at the photo as if it were a venomous snake. She didn't say a word. Not a scream, not an accusation, not even a gasp. Just that terrifying, absolute silence. It was more potent than any shouting match could have been. The woman who had built her entire life on controlling narratives, on maintaining a pristine image, was utterly speechless. She slowly, almost mechanically, put the photo back into the manila envelope. Her hands trembled, just slightly. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Eli. She just turned and walked out of the kitchen, her footsteps heavy and slow, like someone carrying an immense weight. That night, the house was eerily quiet. Eli was asleep in his bassinet. I lay in my bed, listening. Around midnight, I heard sounds from Penelope's room. Not loud, angry sounds, but quiet, methodical ones. The soft click of a suitcase latch, the rustle of clothes being folded, the muffled thud of something heavy being placed inside. She was packing. I got out of bed and crept to my door, opening it just a crack. The light was on in her room. I could see her through the sliver of space, moving with a strange, sombre grace. She was pulling clothes from her closet, toiletries from her bathroom. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. She wasn't packing for a trip. She was packing to leave. For good. A strange mix of triumph and bitterness swirled inside me. This was it. This was the justice I had sought. But it wasn't the cathartic explosion I might have once imagined. It was quiet, almost mournful. The silence from her was a confession, a surrender. The next morning, the phone calls started, not just to me, but to Penelope. Her phone rang incessantly, but she didn't answer. I heard her voicemails filling up, then the frantic texts. Aunt Jennifer called me again, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "Vivienne, I can't believe everything." Penelope won't answer her phone. What is going on? I simply told her, "The truth, Aunt Jennifer. That's what's going on." The family was in an uproar. Some, like Aunt Jennifer, were clearly shocked and felt betrayed. The messages I received indicated a deep sense of anger at Penelope for the years of lies, for the way she had treated me and Eli, and for denying their own heritage. Others, the ones who were perhaps too proud or too invested in the Quinn image, remained silent or sent vague, non-committal texts. They wouldn't admit she lied, but they also couldn't deny the evidence. The carefully constructed facade of Penelope's life was crumbling, not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, devastating revelations. Around noon, there was another knock at the door. It was Amy. She looked tired, her eyes a little red, but her expression was firm. "Hey," she said softly, stepping inside. She didn't ask about Penelope. She didn't ask about the packets. She just walked straight to Eli's playpen. Eli, now almost 5 months old, was awake and kicking his legs. Amy knelt down, her face breaking into a genuine, loving smile. "Hey, little man," she cooed, reaching out a hand. Eli, recognizing her voice, reached out his own tiny hand and grasped her finger. Amy gently picked him up. She held him close, rocking him slowly. For the first time since his birth, Eli was held by a blood relative with genuine, unconditional love, a love untainted by judgment or shame. It wasn't just me holding him, his mother. It was family. My heart ached, a sweet, painful ache. This was what I had fought for him to be seen, to be accepted, to be loved. Penelope emerged from her room a few hours later, pulling a large suitcase behind her. She was dressed in a simple travel outfit, her hair still in its severe bun, but her face was pale and drawn. She walked past the living room, past the kitchen, towards the front door. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Eli, who was now asleep in his bassinet in the living room. As she reached the door, she paused. Her hand was on the doorknob. She turned her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge my presence. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. Her gaze was empty, devoid of the usual anger or disdain. It was just defeat. She couldn't meet my eyes for long. Her gaze flickered away, to the floor, to the wall, anywhere but me. Then she opened the door and walked out. Penelope walked out the front door without a backward glance. The click of the latch echoed in the sudden silence of the house. Eli, almost 5 months old, was still asleep in his bassinet. Amy, my 17-year-old cousin, stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. We watched through the window as Penelope got into her car, a dark sedan, and drove away, disappearing down the street. No goodbye, no final words, just the quiet, self-imposed exile of a woman whose carefully constructed world had imploded. The house felt lighter, as if a suffocating blanket had been lifted. The air, once thick with unspoken judgment and tension, now felt breathable. I picked up Eli, holding him close. He stirred, blinked his big dark eyes at me, and offered a sleepy smile. Amy reached out and gently stroked his cheek. "She's really gone," Amy whispered, a strange mix of relief and sadness in her voice. "She is," I confirmed. It was a victory, undeniably, but it wasn't the triumphant explosion I might have once imagined. It was quiet, almost anticlimactic. The rage I had carried for months, the bitter resentment, still simmered under the surface. It wasn't gone, not entirely, but it was different now. It was no longer consuming me. The days that followed were a whirlwind of calls and texts. My phone was a constant source of updates from the extended family. Aunt Jennifer, my mother's sister-in-law, called me crying, apologizing profusely for not believing me sooner. She said she'd confronted Penelope multiple times, but my mother had just hung up on her. Other relatives expressed shock, anger, and some, a quiet understanding. I always wondered why she was so secretive about her family, one cousin admitted. It makes so much sense now. But the family's response was, as expected, mixed. Some were genuinely horrified by Penelope's deception and rallied around me and Eli. Aunt Jennifer started visiting regularly, bringing over meals and offering to babysit. She held Eli with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. My other aunts and uncles, those who had initially distanced themselves, began to reach out, some with tentative apologies, others with just quiet support. Then there were the others, the ones too proud, too invested in the Quinn name and its perceived purity. They remained silent. They didn't acknowledge the evidence, didn't respond to my calls or texts, and certainly didn't reach out to Penelope. For them, the truth was too inconvenient, too damaging to their own carefully curated reality. They simply chose to ignore it, hoping it would fade away. But the silence from Penelope herself, the woman who had built her life on image, spoke volumes. Her absence was her confession. Weeks melted into a month, then 2. Eli was growing fast, almost 7 months old now, crawling and babbling, his laughter filling the house. The house felt warmer, more like a home. Amy visited more often, sometimes just to sit with me, sometimes to play with Eli. She was a quiet, steady presence, a reminder that not all family was toxic. She asked me about the old photos, about Leonard Davis, wanting to understand her own family history, a history Penelope had tried to bury. I shared what I knew, piecing together the fragments of truth for her. I found a strange kind of peace in the routine of caring for Eli, in the quiet moments of his growth. The constant battle with Penelope had drained me, but now, with her gone, I could focus on building a life for us. The rage and grief were still there, like old scars, sometimes aching in the quiet moments, but they no longer dictated my every move. I started spending some of my newfound quiet time on online forums, particularly those dedicated to family drama and uncovering hidden ancestry. I shared parts of my story, anonymously at first, then more openly. I didn't frame it as revenge, but as a journey to truth. I talked about how I had exposed a lie without raising my voice, how I had used documentation and evidence to dismantle a narrative built on shame. I offered advice to others grappling with similar family secrets, with parents who denied their heritage or their children's identities. It felt good to channel my experience into something helpful, to empower others to seek their own truths. I realized then that this wasn't about hurting Penelope. It never truly was. It was about truth reclaiming its place. It was about Eli and his right to know who he was, to be loved for exactly who he was, without question or shame. It was about breaking a cycle of denial that had poisoned generations. But peace, I learned, was incomplete. Some wounds insisted on lingering. The question of my own father, the mystery of Seller County, Georgia, remained. It was a thread I hadn't yet pulled, a ghost that still whispered in the corners of my mind. It was a reminder that even when one lie is exposed, others can remain, waiting. She thought lies buried in attic boxes die. I proved to her that truth only waits, and waits, with teeth. You owe me for being born, Sydney. That's why you're doing this. My mother, Joanna, said it with such casual certainty, like she was reminding me to pick up milk, not demanding I bankroll her extravagant 60th birthday party. I was 38 years old, a single mum, and a teacher barely making ends meet. And yet there she was, laying claim to my entire existence over the phone. I gripped my mug so hard, I thought the ceramic would crack. This wasn't new. This was the soundtrack to my life. Every breath I took, every achievement, every struggle, it all came back to how much I supposedly owed her. It was a debt she meticulously tallied, a ledger only she could see, and the interest compounded daily. I remember one specific entry in that invisible ledger, etched into my memory like a brand. Leela, my daughter, was just a few weeks old, still tiny and fragile, a miracle I'd fought tooth and nail for. It was a sweltering July afternoon, a family barbecue at my aunt's house. Everyone was there, cousins, aunts, uncles, even some of Joanna's neighbourhood friends. I was 30, exhausted, still navigating the bewildering landscape of new motherhood, my body a foreign country after childbirth. I wore a loose sundress, trying to hide the lingering softness around my middle, feeling self-conscious but desperate to be present. Joanna, then 52, was holding court by the grill, her laugh echoing a little too loudly. She caught my eye, then gestured vaguely at me with her wine glass. "Look at Sydney," she announced, her voice carrying over the chatter. "She's still got that post-baby glow, doesn't she? More like a post-baby bloat, if you ask me." A few nervous titters rippled through the crowd. My cousin, Shanice, who was 28 at the time, gave me a sympathetic glance, but no one said anything. Joanna, emboldened, continued. "Honestly, I bounced back so much faster after I had her. Some women just don't have the discipline, do they? It's a shame, really. All that hard work to get pregnant, and then you just let yourself go." She punctuated it with a dismissive wave of her hand, then turned back to her friends, who were now awkwardly pretending to be fascinated by the charcoal briquettes. My cheeks burned. I felt every eye on me, every whisper, every unspoken judgment. My sundress suddenly felt like a spotlight, highlighting every curve I wished wasn't there. I mumbled an excuse about needing to check on Layla and retreated inside, tears blurring my vision. I locked myself in the bathroom, staring at my reflection, seeing only what Joanna had pointed out: the soft belly, the tired eyes, the faint stretch marks. That day, the joy of being a new mother was overshadowed by the familiar, crushing weight of her disapproval. It was a pattern, a constant chipping away at my self-worth, always public, always humiliating. Back in the present, the phone was still warm against my ear. "Sydney? Are you listening?" Joanna's voice was sharp, cutting through my thoughts. "Yes, Mother, I'm listening," I said, my voice flat. "Good, because this party is important. My 60th. It needs to be spectacular. The kind of event people talk about for years. I'm thinking a full ballroom, a live band, top-tier catering, and of course, fireworks. Nothing less will do." She paused, expecting agreement. "And you're handling it?" "All of it. The planning, the deposits, the final payments. Consider it your repayment for all those years I sacrificed for you. You owe me." She didn't ask. She stated. She never asked. It was always a demand, cloaked in the language of obligation and guilt. For years I had jumped, I had paid, I had performed. I had tried to earn the love she withheld, to make up for the imaginary debt she insisted I carried. I had tried to be the perfect daughter, the one who never caused trouble, the one who always showed up, the one who always paid. But something had shifted inside me. Maybe it was watching Lila, so full of unbridled joy, so unburdened by the kind of emotional baggage I carried. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of Joanna's demand, the casual cruelty of it. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach, but it wasn't fear or sadness. It was something new, something sharp. I spent the rest of the afternoon on my laptop, opening emails, clicking links. I pulled up the catering invoice Joanna had just forwarded, a staggering 5-figure sum for a gourmet buffet and open bar. My finger hovered over the delete button. A bitter smile touched my lips. "She wanted a party," I muttered to the empty room. "She'll get a party, all right." I clicked delete. The mistake she never fixed. That's what Joanna used to call me. Not to my face, not usually, but loud enough for me to hear from behind closed doors. I was a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, hiding behind the living room door, listening to her complain to a friend on the phone. "She's just so difficult, always has been. A mistake, really. The one I never fixed." The words burrowed deep, forming the bedrock of my self-worth. Every time I stumbled, every time I failed, every time I just existed. In a way that displeased her, that phrase echoed. It was a constant reminder that I was inherently flawed, a project she'd given up on. It explained why her love felt conditional, why I always had to earn it, why I always fell short. My phone buzzed, pulling me from the memory. It was Meredith, my younger sister. Meredith, 35, had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth things over, usually by caving to Joanna's demands. She was 3 years younger than me, but sometimes she acted like the older one, always trying to protect me from Joanna's wrath, even if it meant sacrificing herself. "Hey," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too strained. "Mum just called. She's ecstatic about the party. Says you're really taking charge." "Oh, am I?" I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. I was sitting at my kitchen table, a half-eaten bowl of cereal in front of me. Lila was still asleep. "Yeah, she was going on about the venue and the caterer. Said you'd already confirmed everything." Meredith paused. "Look, Sydney, I know she's a lot, but it's her 60th. Can't we just get through this? Don't rock the boat." Don't rock the boat. That was Meredith's mantra, her survival strategy. It was a strategy born from years of watching Joanna's unpredictable storms. I understood it, intellectually, but emotionally I was done. I remembered another boat-rocking incident, one that still made my stomach clench. I was 31, and I'd just had a miscarriage. It was early, only 10 weeks, but it had shattered me. I'd been so careful, so hopeful. Joanna, then 53, had come over, ostensibly to comfort me. "You know," she'd said, sitting stiffly on my couch, not even offering a hug, "this is probably for the best. You're not exactly stable, are you? A teacher's salary, a tiny apartment. How are you going to manage? Honestly, it's a blessing in disguise. A child needs a proper foundation, not this." She gestured around my small but perfectly adequate living room. "And besides, you're so emotional. You'd probably just pass on all your anxieties to it. Some women just aren't cut out for motherhood." The words had landed like physical blows. My grief, already a gaping wound, had been ripped wider by her casual cruelty, her ability to twist my pain into another indictment of my worth. It wasn't comfort. It was a weapon. She had weaponized my miscarriage, using my deepest vulnerability to reinforce her narrative of my inadequacy. It was a pattern she'd perfected over decades. "Sydney, are you still there?" Meredith's voice brought me back. "Yeah, I'm here," I said, shaking my head slightly to clear the lingering bitterness of the memory. "Just thinking. Well, just keep thinking about how much easier it'll be if you just go along with it," Meredith urged. "She's already telling everyone how amazing it's going to be. Mrs. Henderson from next door called her this morning, apparently, just to gush about how lucky Joanna is to have such a devoted daughter, planning such a grand affair." I could picture it. Joanna, preening, basking in the glow of her neighbour's admiration. She lived for appearances, for the carefully curated image of the perfect mother, the perfect hostess. The party wasn't for her, not really. It was for them, for the audience she so desperately craved. Later that week, I saw it firsthand. I stopped by Joanna's house to drop off some mail that had been misdelivered to my old address. Her front door was open, and I could hear her voice, loud and theatrical, coming from the living room. "Oh yes, Sydney is just insisting on handling everything," she was saying to a group of her bridge club friends, their perfectly coiffed heads nodding in unison. "She's so determined to make my 60th truly unforgettable. She already has the ballroom booked, and the catering is going to be divine. And the fireworks. She's even arranged for a spectacular fireworks display. My little girl, always so thoughtful." I walked in, plastering a smile on my face. "Hi, Mum." "Ladies," Joanna beamed, a performance for her audience. "Sydney, just the woman I was talking about. Come, tell Mrs. Davies about the menu you've chosen. She's dying to hear." I played along, nodding, making vague, positive noises about the exciting plans and the wonderful surprises for the party. My stomach churned, but my face remained serene. They had no idea. They saw the dutiful daughter, the one who was making her mother's dreams come true. They saw the facade. I left after 20 minutes, my smile aching. The car ride home was quiet, except for the low hum of the engine and the frantic beating of my own heart. I pulled into my driveway, exhausted by the charade. As I unlocked my front door, my phone buzzed with a new text message. It was from Joanna. "Don't forget to confirm the fireworks show. This night needs to be perfect." The fireworks text from Joanna felt like a gauntlet thrown down. Perfect. She wanted perfect. I leaned back against my kitchen counter, the phone still in my hand, and a slow, deliberate calm settled over me. Perfect, she would get. Just not the kind she expected. Over the next 2 weeks, I systematically dismantled the perfect party. It was a careful, almost surgical process. First, the catering. I called the company, explained that due to unforeseen circumstances, we'd have to cancel the booking. They were professional, if a little disappointed about the lost revenue. I made sure to confirm that the deposit, which Joanna had insisted I pay, was non-refundable. That was part of the plan. She wouldn't get that money back, not from them. Next, the DJ. A quick email, a polite cancellation. Then the florist, the photographer, the custom cake baker. Each call, each email was a small victory, a tiny thread snipped from the elaborate tapestry Joanna was weaving in her mind. I kept a spreadsheet, meticulously tracking each cancellation, each non-refundable deposit. The money, a significant chunk of my savings, was gone, but it wasn't gone for nothing. While I was meticulously unravelling Joanna's grand design, I was also weaving a new one, a secret one. This one was for Lila. My daughter Lila was 8 years old, a bright, joyful spark who deserved every ounce of happiness I could give her. She loved roller coasters. The faster and twistier, the better. She'd been begging to go to the new adventure park upstate for months, but it was expensive, a luxury I usually couldn't justify. Now, it was the only thing that mattered. I booked a 2-night stay at a hotel near the park, just a few hours' drive from our house. I bought tickets for both of us for 2 full days. I even found a small local place that made custom t-shirts, and I ordered 2 matching ones. Adventure awaits for me, and Coaster Queen for Lila. The thought of her face lighting up, the pure, unadulterated joy, was the fuel that kept me going through the deceptive calls and Joanna's increasingly demanding texts. My best friend, Caitlin Martinez, was my co-conspirator and my conscience. Caitlin, 39, was a year older than me, a no-nonsense woman with a heart of gold and a knack for cutting through my self-doubt. Her husband, Truman, 40, was quietly loyal and incredibly practical. I called Caitlin the day after I deleted the catering invoice. "You're doing what?" Caitlin's voice was a mix of shock and admiration. We were on speakerphone, and I could hear Truman in the background, probably making coffee. "I'm cancelling the party," I repeated, feeling a surge of defiant energy. "All of it. And I'm using the money for a surprise trip for Lila, an adventure park, the one she's been dreaming about." There was a beat of silence. Then Caitlin burst out laughing. "Sydney Horton, you magnificent bastard! I knew you had it in you." "It's going to be messy, Kate," I admitted, the adrenaline starting to wear off, replaced by a familiar knot of anxiety. "Joanna's going to lose her mind." "Oh, she absolutely will," Caitlin agreed, her tone serious now. "And she'll try to make you pay for it, in every way she knows how. She'll turn the family against you. She'll try to make you feel like the worst person on earth. Are you ready for that?" "I think so," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'm tired of being the punching bag. Lila deserves better than a mother who's constantly walking on eggshells." "Damn right she does," Caitlin affirmed. "Okay, so, what do you need? Logistics? Alibis? I'm in." Truman's good with maps and finding obscure routes, if you need to avoid any unexpected visitors. Truman, true to form, helped me map out the best route to the adventure park, avoiding major highways that Joanna might know I'd take. He even looked up hotel reviews and suggested a few kid-friendly restaurants near the park. Caitlin, meanwhile, became my emotional anchor, reminding me of all the times Joanna had belittled me, all the times she'd made me feel small. She kept my resolve from wavering. As the day of the party drew closer, Joanna's excitement became almost unbearable. She called me daily, sometimes multiple times, to discuss trivial details, the exact shade of the tablecloths, the font on the personalised napkins, the playlist for the DJ. I humoured her, offering vague affirmations, pretending to confirm things I'd already cancelled. Then, a week before the supposed party, Joanna outdid herself. She shared a link on her social media, tagging me in the post. It was a small article from the local community paper, buried on page 3, but Joanna had clearly orchestrated it. The headline read, "Local matriarch Joanna Horton to host exclusive 60th birthday bash." The article went on to describe the lavish affair, the esteemed guest list, and the spectacular fireworks display being planned by her devoted daughter, Sydney. I stared at the screen, a cold fury building in my chest. Her narcissism, writ large for the entire town to see. She wasn't just planning a party, she was crafting a public image, a monument to her own self-importance, and I was the unwitting architect. "Exclusive bash," I scoffed, tossing my phone onto the couch. "Oh, it'll be exclusive all right, just not in the way she thinks." The dress fitting was scheduled for 2 days before the party. Joanna had insisted on it, of course, wanting to make sure her devoted daughter looked presentable for the grand event. I dreaded it. It was another opportunity for her to pick me apart, to find fault, to remind me of my inherent inadequacy. I arrived at the boutique, a place Joanna frequented for her own lavish outfits. It reeked of expensive fabric and condescension. Joanna, 60, was already there, holding up a shimmering floor-length gown, her eyes narrowed critically. "Sydney, darling," she cooed, a saccharine tone that always preceded a barb. "This one, I think, it's forgiving, for your shape." I forced a smile. "It's lovely, Mother." She handed it to me, then turned to the sales associate. "My daughter here," she announced, loud enough for half the store to hear, "is planning my 60th birthday. A truly magnificent affair. She's been so busy, she hasn't had much time for herself, poor dear." She paused, then lowered her voice conspiratorially, though still loud enough to carry. "It's a shame, really. I was hoping Lila would inherit my good genes, but it seems she's taking after Sydney's side of the family. All that failure." The word hung in the air, a venomous whisper. Failure genes. Not just me, but my daughter too. My sweet, joyful Lila, who was only 8 years old, already being tainted by Joanna's poison. It was a casual joke, delivered with a dismissive wave of her hand, but it hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Lila. Joanna was already trying to infect her, to plant the seeds of self-doubt and unworthiness that had plagued me my entire life. I felt a tremor run through me, a cold wave of nausea. I excused myself, mumbling something about needing to use the restroom. I stumbled into a small, empty dressing room, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the clasp of the dress. I didn't even try it on. I just stood there, leaning against the cool wall, trying to breathe. Failure genes. The echo of a much older memory surfaced, sharp and clear. I was maybe 6 or 7, a tiny thing, hiding behind the closed door of my parents' study. I'd heard Joanna's voice, hushed but angry, on the phone. "She's just a little parasite," she'd hissed, "always taking, never giving, a drain on everything. I don't know what I did to deserve her." A parasite, a mistake, a failure. The labels she'd given me, the identity she'd tried to force upon me, had been a constant battle. But I was 38 now. I had my own daughter, a vibrant, innocent child who deserved to grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally, that she was a gift, not a burden. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The shaking subsided, replaced by a fierce, cold resolve. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about breaking a cycle. It was about protecting Lila from the same emotional abuse that had scarred me. Joanna could not do this to my daughter. I walked out of the dressing room, the untried dress still on its hanger. "Mother," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding, "this dress isn't quite right." "I'll find something else." Joanna looked annoyed, but she shrugged. "Fine, just make sure it's suitable for May party." I nodded, a small knowing smile playing on my lips. "Oh, It will be. Perfectly suitable. The next day, the day before the party, I picked up a rented dress bag from a local costume shop. It was a standard black garment bag, the kind used for formal wear. Inside, it was empty. I drove to Joanna's house, pulled into her driveway, and walked up to her mailbox. It was a large, ornate thing, designed to impress. I carefully folded the empty dress bag and pushed it inside, making sure it was visible. The label on the outside, written in bold, elegant script, read, "For the Queen." I got back in my car, started the engine, and pulled away. The empty dress bag, a silent promise, sat waiting in Joanna's mailbox. The decision was final. There was no going back. The day of the party dawned bright and clear, a perfect backdrop for Joanna's grand humiliation. I imagined her waking up, a flutter of anticipation in her chest, already picturing the limos, the flashing cameras, the adoring faces of her guests. She'd probably spent hours getting ready, meticulously applying her makeup, choosing the perfect dress, not the one I'd rejected, but something equally ostentatious. She'd take dozens of selfies, her carefully curated smile plastered on her face, ready to post them for the world to see. But I wasn't there to witness it. Lila and I were hundreds of miles away, the sun streaming through the car windows as we drove north. Lila, 8, was practically vibrating with excitement in the passenger seat, clutching a worn-out map of the adventure park. "Mum, are we there yet? How much longer? Can we go on the cyclone first? Please, please, please." "Almost there, sweet pea," I said, my own heart lighter than it had been in years. "And yes, we can go on the cyclone first. If you're brave enough." "I'm the bravest," she declared, puffing out her chest. We arrived at the adventure park just as the gates opened. The air was filled with the happy screams of children, the distant rumble of roller coasters, and the sweet smell of popcorn. Lila's eyes were wide, her mouth agape. She grabbed my hand, pulling me towards the biggest, most intimidating roller coaster in the park, the Cyclone. "Come on, Mom!" "Let's go!" We stood in line, the anticipation building with every click and clack of the coaster cars above us. When it was our turn, Lila practically leapt into the seat. I strapped myself in beside her, a nervous flutter in my stomach that had nothing to do with Joanna. The ride lurched forward, slowly climbing the steep incline, the wind whipping through my hair. At the top, we paused for a terrifying moment, looking down at the miniature world below. Then, we plunged. Lila's shriek of pure, unadulterated joy was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Her arms were thrown wide, her face a mask of exhilaration, her ear-to-ear grin, visible even as we twisted and turned through the loops and drops. I laughed. A genuine, unrestrained laugh that felt foreign on my own lips. It was pure, simple, glorious fun. It was everything I had never had as a child. It was worth every penny, every lie, every potential fallout. Meanwhile, back home, the clock was ticking towards 7 p.m., the supposed start time of Joanna's exclusive bash. I pictured her, dressed to the nines, probably pacing her living room, waiting for the first limo to pull up, for the first guests to arrive. She'd be checking her phone, expecting a text from the venue manager, confirming everything was ready, but there would be no limos, no guests, no venue manager. Joanna, undoubtedly growing impatient, would eventually decide to head to the ballroom herself, perhaps with Chaz, her smug, opportunistic boyfriend, in tow. She'd arrive at the grand entrance, expecting to see lights blazing, music spilling out, a red carpet rolled out just for her. Instead, she would find silence, darkness, an empty parking lot, the ballroom cold and locked, a stark monument to her inflated ego. No lights, no music, no catering staff, no floral arrangements, no DJ. Just the echoing silence of her own expectations crashing down. I imagined her standing there, the realization slowly dawning, her perfectly made-up face contorting in confusion, then disbelief, then rage. The public humiliation she had so gleefully inflicted on me, time and time again, was now her own. My phone which I had kept on silent for most of the day, finally started buzzing around 8 p.m. 23 missed calls, all from Joanna. I let them go to voicemail, picturing her frantic, furious face. She'd be spiraling, calling everyone she knew, trying to understand what had happened. I scrolled through my photos. There, in my camera roll, was a picture I'd snapped on the cyclone. Lila, mid-scream, her face alight with pure joy, her ear-to-ear grin a beacon of happiness. I cropped it tightly, focusing only on her radiant face, and posted it to my social media. No caption needed, just that smile. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It wasn't Joanna this time. It was a text from my Aunt Tabitha, Joanna's older sister, who usually stayed out of family drama. The message was short, sharp, and dripping with anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Aunt Tabitha's text, "Do you have any idea what you've done?" landed like a grenade. I stared at it, then at Lila, who was happily munching on a churro, completely oblivious. A strange calm settled over me. Yes, Aunt Tabitha, I had a very clear idea. The fallout exploded almost immediately. My phone, which had been silent for so long, became a relentless buzzing machine. Calls, texts, angry voicemails. The family group chat, usually reserved for mundane updates and holiday greetings, became a war zone. Meredith, true to form, was the first to launch a full-scale assault. She called me, her voice a shrill mix of anger and panic. "Sydney, what in God's name did you do? Mum is absolutely hysterical. She's saying you sabotaged everything, that the venue was empty, that there were no guests, no food, nothing." "That's right," I said, my voice steady. I was sitting on the hotel room bed, watching Lila draw in her new Adventure Park colouring book. "Right? Sydney, this isn't funny. She's devastated. She's crying, she's screaming, she's threatening to disown you. Everyone is talking. Mrs. Henderson from next door called her, asking what happened to the fireworks. It's a complete disaster." "Joanna had her party, Meredith," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Just not the one she planned." "What does that even mean?" she shrieked. "It means you ruined her life. You humiliated her in front of everyone." "She humiliated me my entire life, Meredith," I said, the words coming out with a quiet force that surprised even me. "She mocked my body after I gave birth to Lila. She called me a mistake, a parasite, a failure. She weaponized my miscarriage. She just called Lila's genes failure genes 2 days ago. This isn't about a party, Meredith. This is about decades of emotional abuse." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Meredith's voice dropped, losing some of its frantic edge. She said that about Lila?" "She did," I confirmed, in front of a room full of people at the dress shop. The conversation ended with Meredith muttering something about needing to call Mom back. The group chat, however, continued to rage. My cousin Shanice, who had been there during the postpartum humiliation, posted a vague message about karma and reaping what you sow, which was quickly followed by a flurry of angry emojis from Joanna's side of the family. My Aunt Tabitha, still furious, accused me of being cold and heartless. But then, something unexpected started to happen. Mixed in with the condemnation, a few private messages began to trickle in. They weren't from Joanna's inner circle, but from younger relatives, cousins I barely spoke to, nieces and nephews who were just starting to navigate their own adult lives. "I heard what happened," one text read. "My mum says you're crazy. But honestly, I wish I was that brave." Another, "My grandmother is furious, but I saw what she did to my aunt growing up. You deserved better." And then, a call from Caitlin. "So, the fireworks show was a bust, huh?" She chuckled, then her voice sobered. "Listen, I just got off the phone with my sister's friend who knows Chaz. Apparently, Joanna was telling him, and anyone who'd listen, that she was hoping this party planning would push you over the edge, that you'd have a public meltdown or just crack under the pressure. She wanted you to break down, Sydney. She thought it would prove you were unstable and she could get full control of Lila. She's been talking about how she's worried about your parenting for months." My blood ran cold. Control of Lila. That was it. That was always the ultimate goal. The party wasn't just about humiliation. It was a calculated move to push me to my breaking point, to validate her narrative of my instability, to give her leverage over my daughter. The thought made my stomach clench, but it also solidified my resolve. I had done the right thing. I had protected Lila. "She won't get her," I whispered, my voice fierce. "No, she won't," Caitlin agreed. "You're stronger than she ever gave you credit for. And honestly, a lot of people are seeing that now. She's alienated a lot of people over the years with her antics. This just brought it to a head." We spent another day at the adventure park, soaking up every moment of joy. Lila was exhausted, but beaming, already planning her next visit. We drove home late Sunday night, pulling into my driveway just as the moon was high in the sky. I was carrying Lila, who had fallen asleep in the car, when I saw the figure on my porch. Meredith. She was sitting on the top step, her shoulders shaking. She wasn't screaming, she wasn't angry, she was crying. I put Lila down gently on the couch, pulled a blanket over her, and walked back to the door. Meredith looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I think I get it now," she choked out. Meredith's words, "I think I get it now," hung in the cool night air. I sat down beside her on the porch swing, the wood creaking softly under our combined weight. She didn't look at me, just stared out into the darkness, tears still silently tracking paths down her cheeks. "Mum told me everything," she finally said, her voice raw. "About the party, about the cancellations. She's saying you embezzled the money, that you're a thief. She's already called a lawyer to have you removed from her will." I nodded. I figured as much. "She'll do whatever she can to hurt me." "She's also been posting on social media," Meredith continued, her voice trembling, "calling you ungrateful and cruel. She's turning everyone against you. Aunt Tabitha, Uncle Robert, all the cousins. They're all piling on." I closed my eyes, picturing the flurry of angry comments, the self-righteous indignation. It was Joanna's playbook, perfected over decades. Control the narrative, isolate the victim. "I know," I said, opening my eyes. "Caitlin warned me?" "But she also told me about what Mom said about Lila," Meredith whispered, finally turning to face me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but there was a new light in them, a dawning realization. "About the failure genes, and about what she said after your miscarriage. I didn't know she was that bad, Sydney. Not really. I always just thought she was difficult, demanding. But this is different." "It's always been this bad, Meredith," I said softly. "You just learned to ignore it, or she learned to hide it from you better." Meredith buried her face in her hands, a choked sob escaping her. "God, Sydney, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I'm so sorry I told you to not rock the boat. She's been doing this to you your whole life, hasn't she? And I just let it happen." It wasn't an apology I expected, or even one I thought I needed. But hearing it, seeing Meredith's genuine remorse, a tiny crack appeared in the wall I'd built around myself. "It's okay, Mir," I said, reaching out and putting a hand on her arm. "We all dealt with her in our own ways." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy with unspoken history, with shared trauma, with the dawning of a new understanding between us. The next day, the inevitable confrontation happened. I was at school, in my classroom, preparing for my afternoon lesson. It was a Tuesday, a regular school day. I heard a commotion in the hallway, then the sharp, unmistakable sound of Joanna's voice. "I need to see my daughter, Sydney Horton. She works here, doesn't she?" My heart hammered against my ribs. She wouldn't. She couldn't. But she had. She was here, at my workplace, making a scene. My principal, a kind but firm woman named Mrs. Davies, appeared at my door, her face tight with concern. "Sydney, your mother is here. She's very upset." I took a deep breath. This was it. The final act. "It's okay, Mrs. Davies. I'll handle it." I walked out into the hallway. Joanna, 60, was standing there, dressed impeccably, but her face was a mask of fury, Her eyes were blazing, her lips thin. Chaz, 42, stood a few paces behind her, looking uncomfortable. A few teachers and staff members had gathered, pretending to be busy, but clearly listening. "There you are," Joanna shrieked, her voice echoing in the quiet hallway. "You little viper! You think you can humiliate me and get away with it? You think you can steal my money and ruin my reputation? I'll see you destitute. I'll make sure you never work again. I'll make sure everyone knows what a truly awful, ungrateful daughter you are." I stood perfectly still, my arms crossed. I looked her in the eye, not flinching, not backing down. This was the woman who had spent my entire life trying to break me. But I wasn't that little girl anymore. "You have no idea what you've done, do you?" she hissed, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You've destroyed everything. My friends, my reputation, my standing in the community, all because you're a selfish, miserable failure." "No, Mother," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through her rage. "I know exactly what I've done." Her eyes narrowed, searching for a crack in my composure, a flicker of the old fear. She found none. "You were never mine to control anyway," she spat, the words laced with a bitter, defeated acceptance. "Exactly," I replied, a quiet triumph blooming in my chest. I turned and walked away, back towards my classroom, leaving her standing there, fuming. She screamed something after me, a jumble of curses and threats. But I didn't turn back. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, until I reached my classroom door. I closed it gently behind me, shutting out her rage, shutting out the noise. The silence that followed wasn't the absence of sound. It was peace. 3 months had passed since the day Joanna's party never happened, since the confrontation at my school. 3 months since the silence that had settled over me felt like peace instead of absence. Leela, now 8, was sprawled on her bedroom floor, surrounded by glitter and colourful paper. She was meticulously adding a new photo to a vibrant scrapbook. The cover, decorated with hand-drawn roller coasters and smiling suns, read, "The best day ever." Inside were pictures from our adventure park trip. Lila's ecstatic face on the cyclone, us laughing on the log flume, silly selfies with cotton candy moustaches. Each page was a testament to pure, unadulterated joy. She'd been working on it for weeks, reliving every moment. "Mum, remember how scared you were on the drop tower?" she giggled, holding up a picture of my wide-eyed, terrified face. "Hey!" "I was brave," I protested, ruffling her hair. "You were just braver." Watching her, so unburdened, so full of light, solidified everything. This was the legacy I was building, not one of debt or obligation, but of love and freedom. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. "Sydney, it's Chaz, Joanna's former boyfriend. I hadn't heard from him since the school incident." "Chaz," I said, surprised. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" He chuckled, a dry, humourless sound. "Pleasure? Not so much. Just thought you'd like to know. Joanna's not doing so great. Socially, I mean. Turns out karma's not just a word, is it?" "What happened?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. "Well, after the party fiasco, she tried to spin it as you having a nervous breakdown and sabotaging everything. But then Meredith started talking. Just little things at first, to a few cousins, then it spread. About how Joanna treated you, about the comments she made, about the miscarriage. And then, well, people started remembering other things. How she treated her own family, how she talked about her friends behind their backs. Her bridge club dropped her, her garden club. Even Mrs. Henderson from next door stopped taking her calls. She's pretty much a pariah in her own social circle. And me? I'm out. She's not exactly the cat she used to be, now that her social standing is in shambles, and she's spending all her time trying to sue you for embezzlement. Which, by the way, her lawyer already told her, is a non-starter. He paused, then added, "Honestly, she was always more obsessed with her image than anything else, and you just shattered it. Good for you, Sydney. Good for you." He hung up before I could respond. I sat there for a moment, absorbing it. The truth, finally leaking out. Not from me, but from Meredith. From the ripple effect of Joanna's own actions. It was a strange kind of justice, quiet and insidious. Meredith and I had been talking more since that night on my porch. She started therapy, and slowly, tentatively, she was beginning to unpack her own experiences with Joanna. Our relationship was still fragile, built on years of Joanna's carefully constructed divides, but it was real. For the first time, it felt real. I walked into the backyard, where Lila was now chasing a butterfly, her laughter echoing in the afternoon sun. She stumbled, picked herself up, and kept running, completely unself-conscious. I watched her, a profound sense of peace settling over me. I hadn't fixed my mother. I didn't have to. I hadn't sought forgiveness, not really. I had sought liberation, and in doing so, I had raised someone better instead. Someone who knew her worth, who wasn't weighed down by the invisible ledger of debt. Lila wasn't born out of guilt. She was born out of love. That's the only legacy I care about.
My name is Valerie. I'm 36 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family has been a weight around my neck. Not in an obvious dramatic way that makes for good TV. No, it was far more insidious, a slow, constant drain, like a leaky faucet in a house you can't afford to fix. Every interaction felt transactional, every conversation a subtle probe for what I could give, what I could do, how I could be useful. My older sister, Nicole, who's 38, was the worst offender. On the surface, she was the supportive older sibling, always ready with a hug or a sympathetic ear. But beneath that veneer was a relentless current of envy, a constant need to one-up, to control, to take. It was her idea, for instance, that I should always host family gatherings because my house was bigger and more central, which really meant she didn't want the effort or the expense. My cousins, Josue, 42, Mia, 33, Felix, 40, and even young Presley, 29, followed her lead, each with their own particular brand of entitlement. Josue always looking for a handout. Mia, distant but quick to side with whoever offered the most convenience. Felix, perpetually in some kind of legal or financial mess, always angling for a bailout. And Presley, who used to look up to me, now just another echo in the chorus. Even my Uncle Forrest, 47, who I used to be close to as a kid, had fallen in line with Nicole's narrative. I'm a tech engineer. I've always been good at seeing patterns, at building things, at finding solutions where others only saw problems. For years, I poured that energy into my work, quietly developing a niche patent, something I knew had massive potential. I worked on it in secret, late nights, weekends, while my family assumed I was just doing my computer thing. They never asked, never cared, beyond the vague idea that I had a good job and therefore plenty of money. What they didn't know was that a few months ago I finally sold that patent. It wasn't a quiet little deal. It was a major acquisition by a global tech firm. The payout? A cool $7.8 million. Every single cent of it landed in a new undisclosed account. I didn't tell a soul. Not a single word. The thought of their reaction, the sudden shift from subtle manipulation to outright demands, was enough to make me keep it locked down. The money was in, the papers were signed, and I needed a break. Desperate for mental peace, for a space where I didn't have to anticipate the next subtle jab or veiled request, I booked myself 2 weeks in Bali, a meditation retreat. No Wi-Fi, no distractions, just quiet. Before I left, I did what any good family member would do. I called Nicole. Hey, I'm heading out of town for a couple of weeks, I said, trying to sound casual. Just wanted to leave you a spare key, just in case of an emergency. You know, if a pipe bursts or something. She was all sweetness. Oh, Valerie, that's so thoughtful. Don't you worry about a thing. Have an amazing time. You deserve it. The words were warm, but I heard the familiar, almost imperceptible shift in her tone, the slight quickening of her breath. It was the sound of opportunity knocking. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Thanks, Nicole. I appreciate it. I handed her the key, watching her fingers close around it, a small, almost imperceptible squeeze. She thought she was holding a ticket to my life, a pass to my privacy. She thought she was getting a head start. What she didn't know was that I'd been playing a different game for a long time. A game she didn't even know existed, and I'd already rigged it. I drove away from my house, the Bali itinerary sitting on the passenger seat. My bags were packed, my passport was ready. I made it about halfway to the airport, the highway stretching out before me, the sun glinting off the asphalt. Then I slowed down, pulled off at the next exit, made a U-turn. I wasn't going to Bali. Not yet. I drove back towards the city, a cold, quiet resolve settling over me. My phone was already on silent. My bags would stay in the trunk for a while. Let's see who you really are when you think I'm gone, I whispered to the empty car. Before going further, drop your location in the comments. I'm curious about my global family. The highway hummed, a monotonous drone that usually lulled me into a sense of calm. Not today. 4 days. That's all it took. 4 days since I'd handed Nicole the spare key. 4 days since I'd turned my car around, leaving the Bali retreat itinerary untouched in my trunk. I'd spent those days in a quiet, anonymous hotel room just outside the city, watching. Not my house, not directly, just watching the news, monitoring my accounts, waiting for the first ripple. I pulled up to my street around noon, parking a few blocks away, tucked behind a delivery van. My house, a modest 2-story with a well-maintained garden, looked deceptively normal from the front. But as I walked closer, a knot tightened in my stomach. My car, a silver sedan I'd owned for years, wasn't in the driveway. That was the first red flag. It wasn't a big deal on its own. Maybe Nicole had borrowed it for an emergency, as per our agreement, but it felt off. I walked up the front path, my hand already reaching for the key Nicole had given me. I'd had the locks changed the day after I gave her the spare, but I wanted to see if they'd been bold enough to change them themselves. My fingers fumbled with the key, pushing it into the lock. It didn't turn, not even a click. They had. In 4 days. My own sister, my own family. They hadn't even waited for me to be truly gone. I tried to log into my online utility accounts on my phone, just to check. My password, usually so reliable, didn't work. After a few attempts, a message popped up. Account not found. They hadn't just changed the locks. They were trying to erase me from my own life, piece by piece. The coldness I'd felt driving back intensified, hardening into something sharper, more defined. I moved to the side of the house where a large oak tree offered some cover. Through the living room window, I could see inside. The sight that greeted me was exactly what I'd anticipated, yet still managed to twist something inside me. Nicole was there, perched on my sofa, a half-empty bottle of my expensive Pinot Noir on the coffee table. Mia was rummaging through my desk drawers, pulling out papers, tossing them aside with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Josue was in the kitchen, his head in my pantry, probably looking for anything valuable he could pawn. And Felix? Felix was laughing, holding up a framed photo of me and my late grandmother, making some crude joke I couldn't quite hear, before tossing it back onto the pile of things on the floor. My things. They were laughing, loud and uninhibited, as if they owned the place. As if I was never coming back. My house was a mess, drawers pulled out, cushions askew. It was a ransacking plain and simple, disguised as a casual visit. Then I saw it. On the dining room table, next to a half-eaten plate of what looked like my leftover lasagna, was my laser printer. It was whirring, spitting out sheet after sheet. And on the top sheet, unmistakably, was a high-resolution photo of a check for $7,800,000, and made out to me. My breath hitched, but not in panic. in a strange, almost detached satisfaction. I hadn't even signed that check. The real one, the one I'd received from the patent sale, was locked away in a secure vault, miles from here, under a different name. The one they were copying, that was a decoy, a fake, a perfect high-resolution replica I'd had printed months ago just in case, a little breadcrumb for the hungry wolves. I watched Nicole pick up one of the printed copies, holding it up to the light, a greedy smile plastered across her face. She said something to Mia, who nodded eagerly. They were already planning to steal something that didn't exist. My narration turned colder, a steel rod replacing the knot in my stomach. This wasn't just about money for them. This was about entitlement, about a deep-seated belief that anything I had, anything I achieved, was theirs for the taking. They weren't just taking my things, they were trying to take my identity, my future. I backed away from the window, keeping to the shadows of the overgrown garden. My eyes scanned the familiar landscape of my backyard, landing on the patch of wild roses I always let grow a little too tall. Beneath them, almost completely hidden by the thorny vines and thick foliage, was a small, almost invisible outline in the ground. A heavy metal door, flush with the earth, secured by a single industrial-grade padlock. I knelt, pushing aside the thorny branches, my fingers finding the rough metal. This wasn't just a cellar. This was my sanctuary, my fortress, my control room. I pulled out a small specialized key from my pocket, the only one I owned. With a quiet click, the padlock sprang open. I lifted the heavy door, revealing a set of concrete steps descending into darkness. A faint, cool, earthy smell wafted up. I descended into the only room that was still truly mine, the only room they didn't even know existed. The air in the cellar was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of concrete and electronics. I flicked a switch, and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered to life, casting long, stark shadows. This wasn't just a root cellar. It was a testament to years of quiet paranoia, a physical manifestation of every gut feeling I'd ever ignored, every slight I'd ever dismissed. I'd started building it almost 10 years ago, not long after I'd moved into this house. Back then, it was just a place to escape, a quiet corner where I could think without the constant hum of family expectations buzzing in my ears. I dug it out myself, little by little, after work, on weekends, telling anyone who asked that I was just improving the garden drainage. It became my retreat, a place where I could truly breathe. Then, about 5 years ago, when the idea for the tech patent started to solidify, it transformed. It became my lab, my data room. I installed a dedicated power line independent of the main house and reinforced the walls. I brought in server racks, high-end computers, and enough secure storage to hold a small nation's secrets. This was where the patent was born, where I poured every ounce of my intellect and creativity, all while my family upstairs was oblivious, convinced I was just working late on some boring corporate project. I walked over to a bank of monitors, flicking them on. The screens glowed to life, displaying a complex array of data. Hard drives hummed softly. This room held years of my life, not just the tech patent, but something far more personal, proof. Proof of their patterns, their manipulations, their endless greed. Over the years, I'd learned to trust no one fully, especially not family. It wasn't a conscious decision at first, more a slow, creeping realization that every gesture of kindness came with an invisible price tag. So I started documenting. Not actively seeking dirt, but simply observing, noting. Digital surveillance, not of them in their homes, but of their interactions with me, their financial requests, their casual lies. I had a system, a quiet, almost imperceptible network of microphones and cameras strategically placed in my own home. Not for constant monitoring, but for specific triggered events. like when a certain spare key was given out. I pulled up the recording system. The audio was crystal clear. I fast-forwarded through the initial chatter, the sounds of drawers opening and closing, the clinking of bottles. Then I heard it, Nicole's voice, sharp with excitement. "Oh my God, Mia, look at this!" Mia's gasp. "No way! Is that real?" $7.8 million, Josue's voice, thick with disbelief. Valerie? Valerie has this kind of money? "She's been holding out on us," Felix chimed in, his voice laced with indignation. "All those times I asked for a loan, and she had this sitting around?" "It's a check," Nicole said, her voice almost a purr. "From Global Tech Solutions. Probably the patent she was always so secretive about." A pause. "I mean, she'll never miss it, right? Not all of it." The video feed, synced with the audio, showed Nicole holding up the fake check, her eyes gleaming. Mia was nodding, already calculating. Josue was practically salivating. Felix was pacing, a manic energy about him. I leaned back in my chair, a chilling calm settling over me. This wasn't just about the money. This was about the casual disregard, the instant assumption of ownership, the complete lack of remorse. They didn't even hesitate. I opened a secure line on one of my encrypted phones. "Isabel Montgomery," I said, my voice steady. "It's Valerie. I need you to activate our retainer agreement, effective immediately." Isabel was a legal assistant I'd met years ago through a mutual acquaintance. She specialized in complex property law and had a reputation for discretion. I'd quietly kept her on retainer for the past year, a small monthly fee just in case I ever needed to untangle myself from the web my family had woven around me. She was my only ally, someone who understood the nuances of the law without asking too many questions. "Valerie, I thought you were in Bali." Isabel's voice was calm, professional. "Plans changed. I'm home, and I have a situation." A very clear, very well-documented situation. I paused, watching the live feed from my living room. Nicole was still holding up the fake check, her face contorted in a greedy smile. "She'll never miss it," Nicole repeated, almost to herself, her voice a low murmur, but perfectly audible through my hidden microphones. I smirked. "Oh, Nicole, you have no idea what you're missing, or what's coming." The cellar became my command center. The hum of the servers was a comforting backdrop to the cold, methodical work that began. Isabel Montgomery was efficient, asking precise questions, her voice a calm counterpoint to the storm brewing inside me. She understood the gravity of the situation without me having to spell out the emotional betrayal. She just needed the facts, and I had a decade's worth. My first order of business was to reclaim legal control of my property. While they were busy ransacking my living room, convinced they had taken over, Isabel was quietly filing the necessary paperwork. The locks they'd changed, the utility accounts they'd tried to sever, it was all being reversed. My house was legally mine, and soon, physically mine again. The illusion that I was still in Bali was crucial. I needed them to feel secure in their perceived victory, to dig themselves deeper. I pulled up the digital files I'd meticulously collected over the years. This wasn't just about the fake check. That was the catalyst, the proof of criminal intent. But their pattern of behavior, their history of manipulation and greed, was the foundation of my counterattack. Felix Burns, 40, my cousin with the perpetual legal troubles. I had records of his gambling debts, the ones he always swore he'd paid off, the ones that had led to multiple arrests for bounce checks and petty fraud. I had the details of his most recent undisclosed bankruptcy filing, the one he'd kept secret from everyone, especially the family members he regularly hit up for loans. Mia Wilcox, 33, my emotionally distant cousin. She always presented herself as the picture of suburban perfection, but I had the digital breadcrumbs of her secret life. Encrypted messages, burner phone records, and even a few discreetly captured photos from a private investigator I'd hired years ago for a completely unrelated high-stakes tech project. They detailed her ongoing affair with a married man, a prominent local businessman, a secret that would shatter her carefully constructed facade, and her standing in the community. Joshua Myers, 42, the opportunistic cousin. He worked a dead-end job, always complaining about his financial woes, but I had the records of his failed business ventures, his tax evasion charges that were quietly settled out of court, and the fact that his current dead-end job was actually a front for a small-time, illegal gambling ring. His bankruptcy wasn't just personal, it was tied to illicit activities, and Nicole, 38, the orchestrator. I had years of her financial statements, showing her increasing debt, her reckless spending, her attempts to leverage my name and my perceived wealth for her own benefit. I had the records of her attempts to open credit lines in my name years ago, something I'd caught and quietly shut down without ever confronting her directly. I had the evidence of her pushing Uncle Forrest, 47, to invest in her disastrous pyramid schemes, costing him a significant portion of his retirement savings. I started crafting the letters. Not official legal documents yet, but carefully constructed anonymous communications, each one tailored to the recipient, hinting at exposure, at their darkest secrets coming to light. No threats, no demands, just enough information to plant a seed of doubt to make them sweat. I sent them through untraceable channels, using burner emails and encrypted messaging apps, making sure they couldn't be linked back to me. The goal wasn't just to punish them for the check, it was to dismantle their lives piece by piece, using the very secrets they thought were safe. This was about karmic justice, about them reaping what they had sown, not just now, but over decades. As I worked, the live feed from my living room continued to play. They were still there, celebrating their perceived victory, drinking my wine, making plans for my newfound wealth. Josue was on the phone, excitedly talking about a new car. Mia was looking up luxury vacation rentals. Felix was trying to figure out how to cash the fake check. Then Nicole made a call. Her voice dropped, hushed, almost conspiratorial. "We need to make sure she never signs that real check," she said into the phone, her eyes darting around the room as if she could sense me watching. "The one she's supposed to get from the patent company. We need to make sure it never reaches her. Or that she's incapacitated somehow if it does." I recorded every word. The smirk that spread across my face was cold, devoid of humor. They weren't just trying to steal from me anymore. They were planning to prevent me from ever getting my actual money. They were planning to hurt me. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was war. And they had just given me all the ammunition I needed. The anonymous letters I'd sent out had started to work. I could see the subtle shifts on the live feed. Josue was jumpy, constantly checking his phone. Mia was arguing with someone on the phone, her voice low and furious. Felix was sweating, even in my air-conditioned living room, pacing like a caged animal. Nicole, however, remained outwardly calm, though her eyes held a new, calculating glint. She was the one who would need a more direct, undeniable trigger. I had a plan for that. My cellar wasn't just for surveillance and data storage, it was a control hub. I had a small motion-activated DSLR camera on a tripod, hidden in a discreet corner of the main hallway upstairs, connected wirelessly to my system. It was designed to snap high-resolution photos only when a specific, pre-programmed motion pattern was detected. In this case, someone entering the hallway and stopping in a particular spot. I waited. It was late afternoon, the fourth day since I'd returned. Nicole had gone out earlier, probably to meet with whoever she was conspiring with. She returned around 6 p.m. carrying a large shopping bag. As she walked down the hallway, she paused, right in the sweet spot. She pulled out the fake $7.8 million check, the one she'd copied, and held it up, admiring it, a triumphant smirk on her face. The DSLR clicked silently, capturing her in perfect, incriminating detail. Image downloaded. Check. The next piece of the puzzle was Felix. He was still trying to figure out how to cash the fake check. I watched him on the live feed, pacing, muttering. He finally picked up the phone, dialing. "Yes, this is Valerie Erickson," he said, deepening his voice, trying to sound like me. "I'm calling about a check I need to deposit. It's a large sum from Global Tech Solutions." He rattled off the details of the fake check. I didn't need to wait for the bank to respond. My system was already programmed. The moment he uttered the words Global Tech Solutions and the specific check number, the audio was clipped, time-stamped, and automatically forwarded to the fraud division of the bank he was calling. I also sent it to the local police department, anonymously, with a note about attempted identity theft and fraud. Felix, with his history of bounced checks and petty fraud, was a known quantity to them. This wouldn't be a minor inconvenience for him. While they were preoccupied with their immediate problems, I started turning the screws. From my cellar, I began to remotely cut off utilities. First, the internet. A sudden, unexplained outage. I watched their confusion, their frustrated attempts to reconnect. Then, the cable. No more casual TV watching. Next, the water heater. Cold showers for everyone. I left the power on for now. I wanted them to feel the slow squeeze, not a sudden blackout. Isabel, meanwhile, was working on the legal front. The eviction processes were initiated. Not a sudden dramatic police removal, but the quiet, bureaucratic wheels turning. Notices would be served legally and correctly. They wouldn't know it was me, not yet. They'd just think the landlord, which was now my LLC, was being unusually aggressive. I also started anonymously tipping off authorities about their other activities. A call to the IRS about Josue's undeclared income and his illegal gambling operation. A discreet email to the local business ethics board about Mia's affair with the married businessman, complete with carefully redacted proofs that didn't reveal my source. A tip to the local police about Felix's outstanding warrants and his current attempts at bank fraud. My narration, which had been cold and calculated, began to sharpen, a triumphant edge creeping in. This wasn't my breaking point. That had happened years ago, a slow erosion of trust. This was theirs. This was the moment they finally broke themselves on the altar of their own greed. They had walked into my trap, not because I lured them, but because their own natures compelled them. I watched Nicole on the screen, still trying to make sense of the suddenly dead internet connection. She looked frustrated, but not yet defeated. That would come. A notification popped up on my screen. Isabel. Deposition delivered to Nicole Erickson's workplace as requested. Civil suit for fraud and attempted theft. Damages sought $500,000. I saw it happen in real time. Nicole sitting at her desk looking annoyed. A courier walked in, handed her a thick envelope. She signed for it, her brow furrowed. She tore it open, pulled out the documents. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, then her face went slack. Her jaw dropped. She looked up, her eyes wide, disbelieving. Then she screamed. A raw, guttural sound of pure disbelief and rage. Valerie Erickson was suing all of them. The scream from Nicole's workplace echoed in my cellar, a symphony of pure, unadulterated shock. It was the sound of the first domino falling. The immediate fallout was swift, a cascade of consequences that began to dismantle their carefully constructed lives. Nicole's suspension from work came within hours. The deposition, coupled with the anonymous tips about her financial improprieties and the recording of her conspiring to incapacitate me, was enough to trigger an internal investigation. Her employer, a large, reputable firm, couldn't afford a scandal. I watched her pack her box, her face a mask of disbelief, her usual composure shattered. Felix's situation was even more immediate. His attempt to call the bank pretending to be me, combined with the anonymous tip about his outstanding warrants, led to his detention. He was picked up at my house, still trying to figure out how to get money from the fake check. The police found the copies of the check, the forged documents he'd been trying to use. He was charged with attempted bank fraud and identity theft on top of his existing warrants. I saw him being led away in handcuffs on my surveillance feed, shouting obscenities, completely bewildered. Back at my house, the remaining cousins, Josue, Mia, and Presley, were in a state of growing panic. The utilities were still off, the eviction notices had arrived, and now Felix was gone, and Nicole was suspended. The air was thick with accusation and fear. Josue, always the opportunist, turned his anger on Presley, the youngest at 29. "What did you do, Presley? Did you tell someone? Did you mess something up?" he snarled, his voice tight with fear. Presley, who had been quiet, almost withdrawn since I'd left, finally cracked. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "I didn't do anything, I swear. I just went along with it, like you all said to." Mia, ever the pragmatist, stepped in. "What are you talking about, Presley? What did we say?" Presley started to sob, the words tumbling out in a rush. "The house. You said we could sell the house." "Nicole said Valerie wouldn't care, that she was never really here anyway, that she'd just buy another one with her new money. You said we could sell it piece by piece, use the money for our debts, and then just give her a small cut when she came back if she ever did." The confession hung in the air, raw and ugly. Josue and Mia exchanged horrified glances. They had been so focused on the check, they hadn't realized Presley had taken Nicole's casual suggestions about selling the house as a concrete plan. I allowed myself a small, grim smile in the cellar. This was the moment. The house they thought they were stealing, the one they planned to sell piece by piece, had never truly been hers to steal in the way they imagined. Months ago, long before I even thought about selling the patent, I'd transferred the deed to an LLC, a shell company I controlled completely. It was a measure of protection, an asset shield. My home was legally separate from my personal finances, a fortress within a fortress. They were trying to sell a property that, on paper, was already owned by a corporate entity they knew nothing about. Their plan was built on sand. The revelation of the civil suit, combined with Felix's arrest and Nicole's suspension, sent them into a frenzy. Their phones started ringing. Mine. My encrypted phone, the one they didn't know about, began to buzz. Nicole, then Josue, then Mia, then Uncle Forrest. One by one, their names flashed across the screen. I watched them ring, letting each call go to voicemail. I imagined their desperation, their confusion, their dawning realization that their world was crumbling around them. Finally, a new notification, a voicemail. It was Presley. Her voice was barely a whisper, broken by sobs. "Please, Valerie, I didn't know what they were doing. Not really. I just wanted to fit in. I'm so sorry, please." I listened to the message, my expression unreadable. Presley, the youngest, the one who used to idolize me, the one who was the final straw in my emotional break. Her voice was pure anguish, a stark contrast to the greedy laughter I'd heard just days before. It was a moment of conflict, a flicker of something akin to pity, but it was quickly extinguished. They had all made their choices, and now they would live with the consequences. The day I finally emerged from the cellar was crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside my house. It had been nearly a week since I'd last seen the sun, a week spent meticulously orchestrating their downfall. I wore a simple dark suit, my hair pulled back tightly. My face was devoid of emotion, a blank slate. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about execution. I arrived at my property in a black car, not my own, but one arranged by Isabel. 2 police officers in uniform followed closely behind, along with Isabel and another lawyer from her firm. The front door, which they had changed, was now legally mine again, thanks to Isabel's swift work. As I walked up the path, I saw them through the window. Josue, Mia, Presley, and even Uncle Forrest, who had finally arrived, drawn by the chaos. They were huddled together in the living room, a picture of disarray and fear. The house was still a mess, the remnants of their ransacking visible everywhere, empty wine bottles, discarded papers, my belongings strewn about. I unlocked the front door with a key Isabel had provided, a new one, for the new locks I'd had installed remotely. The click of the lock echoed in the sudden silence as they all froze, their heads snapping towards the sound, their faces contorted in a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. Josue's jaw dropped. Mia's eyes widened to saucers. Uncle Forrest looked like he'd seen a ghost. And Presley, her face already tear-streaked from the past few days, gasped a small, choked sound. I walked straight through the living room, past the wreckage of my life, my gaze fixed forward. I didn't acknowledge them, didn't make eye contact. The police officers and lawyers followed, their presence a silent, undeniable statement. "Valerie?" Nicole's voice cut through the silence, sharp with disbelief. She had returned from her suspension, drawn back to the house by the escalating crisis. She stood in the doorway to the kitchen, her face pale, but still trying to project an air of authority. "What is this? What are you doing?" One of the police officers stepped forward, holding up a warrant. "Felix Burns, you are under arrest for attempted bank fraud, identity theft, and outstanding warrants." Felix, who had been hiding in the kitchen, tried to bolt. He made it 2 steps before the other officer moved swiftly and efficiently, taking him down. He struggled, shouting, "You can't do this. This is Valerie's house. She'll vouch for me." I didn't flinch. I just watched as they cuffed him. Isabel stepped forward, a stack of documents in her hand. She handed a thick packet to Nicole. "Nicole Erickson, you are hereby served with a civil lawsuit for fraud, attempted theft, and conspiracy to defraud, seeking damages of $500,000. Additionally, the property at this address is now under the legal control of Erickson Holdings, LLC. You and all other occupants are hereby evicted, effective immediately. Failure to vacate will result in further legal action." Nicole stared at the papers, her face draining of color. $500,000? Evicted? This is my sister's house. Valerie, tell them. She turned to me, her voice rising in a desperate plea. I finally stopped, turning slowly to face them all. My voice was calm, chillingly so. "You opened the door. I was just holding the receipts." There was no melodramatic speech, no grand explanation, just the cold, hard truth. I had documented everything. Every lie, every theft, every betrayal. Josue and Mia looked at each other, then at Uncle Forrest, who just shook his head, looking utterly defeated. The reality of their situation, the depth of my preparation, was finally sinking in. As the police led Felix away, still protesting, I walked towards the front door. My eyes swept over the room, the mess they had made, the lives they had tried to steal. I saw Presley, huddled in a corner, openly weeping, her face a mask of shame and regret. Our eyes met for a fleeting moment. I saw the anguish, the genuine sorrow. A flicker of something in me, a ghost of the bond we once shared, stirred, but it was quickly suppressed. The cost of their betrayal was too high. I reached the front door, the police and lawyers now outside, waiting. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. "Valerie." Presley's voice was a raw whisper, desperate. "Is this forever?" I turned back, my gaze cold and unwavering. This is family, I replied, my voice flat, devoid of warmth. It was always forever. That's what scared me. And with that, I stepped out, pulling the door shut behind me, locking them inside their crumbling house of cards. Several weeks had passed since I'd locked the door on my old life. I was in a new city now, in a quiet apartment overlooking a river. Boxes were still stacked against the walls, unpacked remnants of a past I was determined to leave behind. The silence here was profound, a stark contrast to the constant, draining hum of my family's presence. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt lonely, not exactly. It was more like a vast, empty canvas, waiting for me to paint something new. I often sat by the window, watching the river flow, and reflected on the cost of what I'd done. It wasn't regret. I had no regrets about dismantling their lives. They had made their choices, and I had simply held them accountable. But there was a weight to it, a profound sense of finality. The void left behind wasn't just the absence of their toxic presence. It was the absence of what I'd once hoped family could be. That hope, however faint, was now truly gone. Their lives, as I'd meticulously orchestrated, had indeed unraveled. Nicole, 38, was bankrupt. The $500,000 civil fraud suit, combined with her legal fees and the loss of her job, had decimated her finances. Her house, the one she'd always flaunted, was in foreclosure. She was scrambling, trying to find any way out, but every avenue was blocked. The legal system, slow but relentless, was closing in. Felix, 40, was still facing charges. His attempt to impersonate me at the bank, coupled with his existing warrants and the evidence I'd provided, meant he was looking at serious jail time. His repeated calls to me from jail, begging for help, went unanswered. He was where he belonged. Josue, 42, had his illegal gambling operation exposed by the IRS. The financial ruin was swift and absolute. He'd lost everything, and the dead-end job he'd complained about was gone, replaced by a mountain of debt and legal woes. Mia, 33, had her carefully constructed life implode. The exposure of her affair led to a very public, very ugly divorce. Her social standing, which she valued above all else, was shattered. She was isolated, shunned by the very circles she'd tried so hard to impress. Even Uncle Forrest, 47, who had sided with Nicole, had faced consequences. The financial investments he'd made in Nicole's disastrous schemes, which I'd quietly documented, were now completely worthless. He'd lost a significant portion of his retirement, and the rest of the family blamed him for not stopping Nicole. He was alone, adrift. The silence of my new apartment was occasionally broken by the ping of a news alert on my tablet, confirming another piece of their downfall. Each notification was a quiet affirmation that justice, in its own cold way, was being served. Then, months later, a letter arrived. It was handwritten, the address unfamiliar, but the looping script on the envelope was unmistakable. Presley. I opened it slowly. Her words were shaky, tear-stained, but clear. Valerie, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if you'll read this, but I had to try. I was so stupid, so desperate to fit in, to be accepted by them. I didn't see what they were doing, not really, or maybe I did, and I just chose to ignore it. I should have known better. I should have remembered what you always taught me, about standing on my own 2 feet, about doing what's right. I loved you like a sister. I should have remembered that. Presley. I read the letter twice, my expression unreadable. Presley, the youngest, the one who had once looked up to me, the one whose voicemail had stirred a flicker of something in me, the one who was the final straw. I walked to the river, the letter clutched in my hand. The water flowed steadily, indifferent to the human dramas played out on its banks. I pulled out a small lighter, the kind I used for candles. I held the corner of the letter to the flame. The paper curled, then blackened, the words disappearing into ash. I watched it burn, the last tangible link to a past I was severing completely. When it was nothing but a fragile, dark flake, I let it fall. The ashes drifted on the breeze for a moment, then settled onto the water, dissolving into nothingness as the current carried them away. A spare key only works if you let them believe they belong. I don't leave doors open anymore.
The scent of lemon polish and old money hit me the moment I stepped through the grand oak doors. It was a familiar smell, one that used to make my stomach clench with a mix of longing and resentment. Now, it just smelled like victory. My victory. Before we continue, drop a comment with where you're watching from. I love seeing my global reach. Gianna, darling, are you sure you're up to this? Sadie's voice, dripping with saccharine condescension, cut through the quiet hum of the house. She was standing in the foyer, supervising a team of movers who were carefully placing a ridiculously oversized chaise lounge. Sadie, my aunt, was 58 now, but still carried herself with the same rigid posture and disdainful air she'd perfected decades ago. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on the simple black uniform I'd chosen. It's a lot of work, you know, keeping a place like this up to standard. Especially since we'll be here for a while. I gave her my most innocent, obliging smile. Oh, I'm sure I'll manage, Aunt Sadie. I'm quite good at managing things. I'm Gianna. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 2 days, I'd officially been the live-in housekeeper of the Carter family mansion. The same mansion that, for the better part of my life, had been dangled just out of reach like a cruel joke. The same mansion that was, in fact, mine. Sadie and her brood, my cousins Paxton and Nina, were moving back in temporarily. Their real estate agent had apparently advised them it was a market lull, and they should wait to sell their current properties. A market lull, indeed. I'd made sure of it. Watching Sadie direct the movers, barking orders about where to put her antique porcelain collection, felt surreal. My mind drifted back to a different moving day, nearly 22 years ago. I was 10 years old, clutching a worn teddy bear, watching my mother, Mary, pack a single cardboard box. It's just a change of scenery, sweetie, she'd whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. She was 33 then, looking much older than her years, her usually vibrant eyes dull and red-rimmed. We were standing in what used to be her study, a room filled with the books and the scent of her favorite jasmine tea. This house, this sprawling, opulent testament to the Carter legacy, was supposed to be hers. My grandmother, her mother, had left it to her. A clear, unambiguous will, until it wasn't. My uncles, Sadie's brothers, had swooped in like vultures. There were hushed conversations I didn't understand, legal terms like undue influence and amendment. All I knew was that one day, my mother was the rightful heir, and the next, she was signing away her inheritance, her face pale and defeated. She never fought it, not legally. She just packed that box, took my hand, and walked away from her birthright, from the only home she'd ever known. She said it wasn't worth the fight, that some things were more important than money. I didn't understand it then. I do now. It wasn't about the money for her. It was about something else, something I was still piecing together. Back in the present, I walked into the kitchen, a place I'd only ever been allowed to enter as a child if I was fetching something for an adult. The pantry was already half filled with Sadie's organic, gluten-free nonsense. I pulled out a label maker. Organic chia seeds became Gianna's chia seeds. Sadie's Earl Grey became Mary's Earl Grey. Small, almost imperceptible changes. Little whispers of ownership. Later, while Sadie was busy berating a mover for a scuff mark on the marble floor, I slipped into the main living room. The walls were still adorned with the same stiff, oil-painted portraits of generations of Carters, all looking down with an air of superiority. My great-grandfather, my grandmother, my uncles, not a single one of my mother. I carefully unhooked the largest portrait, a stern-faced patriarch who looked like he'd invented the concept of judgment. I carried it to the storage room in the basement, a place where forgotten things went to gather dust. It wouldn't be coming back up. By evening, the house was buzzing with activity. Paxton, 36 now, swaggered in, his expensive suit doing little to hide the desperate glint in his eyes. He tried to launch 3 different tech startups in the last 5 years, all spectacular failures. Nina, 34, arrived shortly after, looking perfectly coiffed and utterly bored. She was the picture of polished entitlement, the kind of woman who'd perfected the art of looking down her nose without actually moving her head. They gathered in the drawing room, champagne flutes clinking. I was in the background, ostensibly tidying, but mostly just listening. Honestly, I still can't believe we're back here, Nina drawled, taking a long sip. It's like a step back, but Mother says it's temporary. It is temporary, Sadie affirmed, preening. Just until the market corrects. And frankly, it's nice to have help. Better than those agency types. She gestured vaguely in my direction. Paxton chuckled. Remember Gianna, the little maid? Bet she's still scrubbing floors somewhere. Or probably works in crypto scams now trying to make a quick buck. He snorted, and Nina giggled. I picked up an empty champagne flute, my fingers tracing the delicate rim. A quiet smirk touched my lips. Actually, I thought, the words a silent hum in the grand echoing room. I own the place. No one heard me. Yet. 5 years before I was polishing Sadie's silver, I was polishing my resume, or what little there was of it. I was 27, living in a cramped studio apartment that smelled faintly of instant noodles and desperation. My bank account was a desert, but my brain was a supercomputer. I'd spent years devouring every book, every article, every podcast on finance, market trends, and investment strategies. I didn't have a fancy degree. I dropped out of college after 2 years, unable to afford it, and unwilling to take on more debt for a piece of paper I felt I could outsmart anyway. But I had an instinct, a way of seeing patterns where others saw chaos. That's how I met Brandon Warner. He was 38 then, a real estate magnate whose empire was crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a hurricane. I'd seen an article about his company's stock plummeting, a deep dive into how his aggressive expansion had over-leveraged him. Most analysts were writing him off. I saw an opportunity. I found his office number, somehow bypassed 3 layers of assistance, and got him on the phone. Mr. Warner, I'd said, my voice steady despite my hammering heart, your company isn't dead. It's just playing possum, and I know how to wake it up. He gave me 10 minutes. I gave him a plan. My first bold move was counterintuitive. I advised him to liquidate his most liquid but underperforming assets immediately, even at a loss. Everyone else was telling him to hold, to wait for a rebound. I told him to cut the dead weight, free up capital, and brace for impact. He hated it, but he was desperate enough to listen. My second move came 2 weeks later. The market was in a panic, and everyone was selling. I told him to buy. Not just any stock, but specific, undervalued tech companies that had been unfairly dragged down by the wider market hysteria. I'd spent months tracking these companies, knew their fundamentals were solid. He thought I was insane. You want me to buy when the world is burning? He'd roared. Yes, I'd said, because the fire sale won't last. My third move was the riskiest. I identified a major competitor of his that was about to collapse under its own weight, a house of cards built on speculative debt. I advised him to short their stock. He'd never done anything like it. It was a gamble, but I had a gut feeling that was backed by weeks of late-night data analysis. Within 6 months, Brandon Warner wasn't just saved, he was stronger than ever. The liquidations had given him the cash to weather the storm, the undervalued tech stocks had soared, and the short on his competitor had yielded a massive profit, allowing him to buy up their prime assets for pennies on the dollar. He called me his guardian angel with a spreadsheet. I became his trusted advisor, his quiet partner in a series of increasingly lucrative ventures. He sold me the mansion off-market when the original owners defaulted, a silent transaction that no one in my family would ever suspect. Back in the present, the house was finally quiet. Sadie, Paxton, and Nina were asleep, probably dreaming of their next lavish purchase. I was in my mother's old study, the one I'd seen her pack up 22 years ago. It was still filled with books, though many were now dusty and unread. Tucked away in a hidden compartment behind a loose panel in the bookshelf, I found them, Mary's journals. They were old, leather-bound, and filled with her elegant script. I'd known about them for years, but I hadn't dared open them until now, until I was ready. The entries started innocently enough, everyday thoughts, garden plans, worries about me. Then the tone shifted. There were references to the pressure, to Sadie's threats. My breath hitched. Sadie hadn't just charmed or persuaded Flynn, my mother's lawyer, into rewriting the will. She'd blackmailed him. The journals detailed how Sadie had uncovered a past indiscretion of Flynn's, a minor ethical lapse from early in his career that, if exposed, would have cost him his license and his reputation. Sadie had used it, twisting his arm, forcing him to draft the new will that disinherited my mother. And she threatened my mother too, not with legal action, but with something else, something vague but terrifying that my mother had refused to write down. For Jana's sake, one entry read, I cannot fight this. The cost is too high, but someday she will know the truth. My mother hadn't just given up, she'd been cornered. A sharp rap on the front door startled me, pulling me out of the past. It was well past midnight. Who could it be? I walked to the foyer, my heart pounding. Through the frosted glass, I saw a familiar silhouette. I opened the door. Flynn Garrett stood on the porch, looking older than his 40 years, his face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and grim determination. He held a thick legal brief in his hand. Gianna, he said, his voice low, we need to talk. I found it. The original will had a clause, a very specific, very hidden clause. He pushed the papers into my hand. It's legally reinstated. As of today. The legal documents Flynn handed me felt heavy, not just with their weight, but with the culmination of 2 decades of quiet fury. The original will, meticulously reinstated, with that hidden clause now brought to light. It was real. The house was truly mine, irrevocably. Flynn, looking utterly drained, explained the specifics in hushed tones in the foyer. The clause stipulated that if the beneficiaries of the amended will, my uncles and Sadie, ever failed to maintain the property to a certain standard, or if any evidence of coercion in the amendment process came to light, the original will would automatically revert, making my mother the sole heir or her direct descendants if she was deceased. Sadie's blackmail of Flynn, coupled with years of neglect, which I'd meticulously documented from afar, had triggered it. It was a fail-safe my grandmother had put in place, a final act of protection for her daughter. It's ironclad, Gianna, Flynn said, running a hand through his thinning hair. I've gone over it 100 times. We just needed the proof of coercion, and your mother's journals provided that, alongside my own testimony, which I'm now prepared to give. I thanked him. a silent vow to myself that his reputation would be more than restored. He left just before dawn, leaving me with the official papers and a sense of giddy, terrifying power. I waited until late morning. Sadie was out, likely at her weekly bridge game, oblivious. Paxton and Nina were still nursing their hangovers in the breakfast nook, complaining loudly about the quality of the coffee I'd brewed. Perfect. I walked in, a stack of legal papers held loosely in my hand. Paxton, Nina, I said, my voice calm, almost sweet. Could I have a word with you both? In the drawing room, perhaps. Paxton, 36, looked up annoyed. Can't it wait, Gianna? We're busy. Nina, 34, just raised an eyebrow, a silent challenge. I don't think you'll want to wait for this, I replied, my smile not quite reaching my eyes. They followed me, grumbling, into the opulent drawing room, the same room where they'd mocked me just last night. I closed the heavy doors, the click echoing in the silence. So, I began, setting the papers on the polished mahogany table. I have some news. As you know, I'm currently employed here as the housekeeper, but that's not entirely accurate. Paxton scoffed. What? You're secretly a spy? Spit it out, Gianna. We don't have all day. I picked up the top document, a certified copy of the deed. No, Paxton, I'm the owner. Nina's perfectly manicured hand, halfway to her champagne flute, froze. Paxton's jaw dropped. What in God's name are you talking about? Paxton finally sputtered, his face paling. This is Mother's house. It's been in our family for generations. It was my mother's house, I corrected him, my voice flat. Legally. And now it's mine. Reinstated as of yesterday, thanks to a very specific clause in my grandmother's original will and some rather damning evidence of how that will was changed. I slid the documents across the table, watching their eyes scan the official seals and signatures. They saw Flynn's name, my mother's name, the legal jargon that confirmed their worst nightmare. Nina, ever the quicker one, recovered first. Her face, usually so composed, contorted into a mask of pure panic. This is impossible. You're just the help. You can't possibly own this place. Oh, but I do, I said, leaning back, enjoying the show. Every single square foot, every heirloom, every painting, every dusty corner. It's all mine. Paxton slammed his fist on the table. This is a trick. Sadie will never allow this. We'll fight you in court. You can try, I said, shrugging. But I have the original will, detailed journals from my mother, and a very repentant lawyer who's ready to testify to the coercion, not to mention the financial records proving your mother's neglect of the property over the years. You don't have a leg to stand on. Their bluster deflated. Nina, tears welling in her eyes, reached across the table, grabbing my arm. Jana, please. You can't do this. Think of the family, the scandal. Sadie would be ruined. We'd be ruined. Paxton surprisingly echoed her. Just keep it quiet, Gianna. Please. We can work something out. We can pay you. Whatever you want. Just don't tell anyone. I looked at them, these two people who had delighted in my humiliation for years. The thought of their public downfall was intoxicating. But I had a plan, and it wasn't quite time for the final act. All right, I said, pulling my arm away from Nina's grasp. For now. I'll keep it quiet. But understand this. You are living in my house, and things are going to change. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Brandon. Gianna, he said, his voice serious. I heard through the grapevine you've taken possession of the Carter estate. Smart move, but be careful. Revealing your hand too early can trigger nasty counterattacks. They'll dig for anything, any weakness. They'll try to discredit you. Let them, I said, a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. I'm ready for them. I didn't care about their counterattacks. Not yet. I wanted them to squirm. I wanted them to feel the slow burn of uncertainty before the final inferno. That night, I was in my mother's old study, now my study, reviewing some of the property's old blueprints. I'd had a discreet CCTV system installed weeks ago, a network of tiny cameras hidden in plain sight throughout the house. My tablet chimed, signaling motion in the main hallway outside the study. I tapped the screen. The footage showed Nina, her face pale and determined, creeping towards the study door. She tried the handle. Locked. She then produced a bobby pin from her hair, fiddling with the lock, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was trying to break in. My lips curved into a slow, satisfied smile. It had begun. The CCTV footage of Nina trying to pick the lock to my study confirmed what I already knew. They were desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. I let her try for a few minutes, watching her frustrated attempts, before sending a discreet text to Flynn. Prepare for a full family gathering, formal, within the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, the mansion was abuzz with a different kind of energy. I'd sent out invitations for a holiday housewarming, a seemingly innocuous event designed to draw the entire extended Carter clan back to the estate. Sadie, ever the social climber, had taken it upon herself to ensure everyone RSVP'd. She thought it was her chance to show off her temporary residence, to reassert her place at the top of the family hierarchy. Little did she know, she was walking into her own execution. I was dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, a stark contrast to the sparkling gowns and tailored suits of my relatives. I moved through the crowded ballroom, a phantom among the familiar faces, serving champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Paxton, 36, tried to corner me by the fireplace, his voice low and urgent. Gianna, we need to talk about this situation. Mother's starting to ask questions. She saw you with Flynn the other day. Did she now? I replied, offering him a canapé with a sweet smile. Perhaps she'll get her answers tonight. Nina, 34, glided past, her eyes narrowed. She'd been avoiding me since her failed break-in attempt, her usual poise replaced by a nervous twitch in her jaw. Around 8 o'clock, Sadie, 58, clinked her champagne flute, demanding attention. The chatter died down, and all eyes turned to her. She stood on the small raised platform near the grand staircase, a place she'd always considered her stage. My dear family, she began, her voice resonating with a false warmth. It fills my heart with joy to see so many of you gathered here tonight, in this magnificent home. This house, this estate, has been the heart of the Carter legacy for generations. It represents our history, our values, our enduring success. She paused, beaming, clearly relishing the moment. It reminds us of who we are and where we come from, a testament to hard work, foresight, and family unity. A few polite claps rippled through the room. Sadie took another dramatic sip of champagne. And as we look to the future, we must remember the importance of preserving this legacy for our children and their children. To ensure that the Carter name continues to shine brightly, just as this house has always shone. She finished with a flourish, expecting applause, perhaps even a standing ovation. Instead, I stepped forward, holding a stack of envelopes. My heart was pounding, a drumbeat of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. Thank you, Aunt Sadie, I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the lingering silence. Every head in the room turned to me. Sadie's smile faltered. That was a lovely speech about legacy, and you're absolutely right. This house is a testament to hard work, foresight, and family unity. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the faces of my relatives, many of whom still looked at me with a mixture of confusion and mild disdain, especially the foresight of my grandmother, who ensured that the true legacy of this house would be preserved. A murmur went through the crowd. Sadie's eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion replacing her smugness. You see, I continued, my voice gaining strength, for too long, this house has been misrepresented. Its ownership, its purpose. But tonight, that changes. I walked to the center of the room, directly in front of Sadie. You spoke of family unity. I'm here to tell you that this house, this legacy, now belongs to the family member who was always meant to have it. I held up the first envelope, emblazoned with the Carter crest. My name is Gianna, and I'm your landlord. The words hung in the air, thick with disbelief. Gasps erupted. Sadie's face went from pale to ashen. Paxton looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Nina looked like she was about to vomit. I started handing out the envelopes, moving through the stunned crowd. Each one was personalized, crisp white paper with bold red ink. 30-day notice, Aunt Sadie, I said, placing an envelope in her trembling hand. Consider this your eviction notice. I moved to Paxton, whose face was a mask of horror. Paxton, 30 days. You'll find the terms of your departure quite clear. Then Nina, who snatched the envelope from my hand as if it were poison. Nina, 30 days. I'm sure you'll find another place to be polished and manipulative. I continued through the room, handing out notices to my various uncles, aunts, and cousins who had benefited from my mother's disinheritance. Each notice was tailored, but the message was the same. 30-day deadline, red ink. The room erupted into chaos, shouts, accusations, demands for explanation. Sadie, finding her voice, shrieked, "This is an outrage! You can't do this!" "This is our home." I turned back to her, my expression serene. "It was your mother's home, Aunt Sadie, and then it was legally my mother's, and now it's legally mine. The paperwork is all in order, thanks to a hidden clause and the truth finally coming to light." I watched as the red ink on the notices seemed to bleed into their faces, painting them with fury and fear. The holiday housewarming was officially over. Later, as the last of the stunned and furious relatives stormed out, leaving a trail of discarded champagne flutes and shattered illusions, a figure emerged from the shadows near the kitchen. It was Carson, my younger brother, 30 now. He'd been quiet throughout the evening, observing from a distance. He was usually reserved, emotionally distant, but his eyes were blazing. "Gianna," he said, his voice low and strained. "What was that? This isn't you. You're becoming one of them." Carson's accusation hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. "You're becoming one of them." His words stung, not because I believed them, but because they came from him, the one person who had remained somewhat loyal, even if emotionally distant. He was 30 now, still looking at me with a mix of admiration and apprehension. "One of them?" I repeated, my voice flat. "Carson, they stole everything from Mom. They called me a maid, a dropout. They laughed at us. And now you're doing the same thing to them," he retorted, gesturing vaguely towards the door where our relatives had just stormed out. "Humiliating them, kicking them out. It's cold, Gianna. It's justice," I said, my voice hardening. "And it's long overdue. They had their turn. Now it's mine." He shook his head, a look of disappointment on his face, and walked away, leaving me alone in the silent, echoing ballroom. His reaction was a bitter pill, but it didn't deter me. Not yet. The next morning, the real fun began. My legal team, orchestrated by Flynn, started rolling out the back payment invoices, not just for the 30 days of rent they owed me, but for the past 5 years. I'd calculated a fair market rate for the mansion's upkeep and living expenses, plus a premium for the inconvenience of their illegal occupancy. The numbers were astronomical. My phone started ringing off the hook. First, it was Nina, 34, her voice tight with barely suppressed hysteria. Gianna, this is insane. 5 years of rent? We can't possibly pay that. And for what? We were living in our family home. Your family home that was legally mine, I corrected her calmly. Consider it retroactive rent and damages for the wear and tear. You'll find the detailed breakdown in the invoice. She then tried a different tactic. Look, I know you're angry, but we can make this right. How much do you want to keep this quiet? $1 million? 2? Just name your price, and we'll make it disappear. This doesn't have to get ugly. I almost laughed. Hush money, Nina. You think you can buy me off? After everything? The price is already named. It's on the invoice, and it's non-negotiable. I hung up before she could respond. Next was Paxton, 36. He tried the charm offensive, which was even more pathetic. Gianna, come on, we're family. You and I, we always had a special connection, didn't we? Remember that summer at the lake house? We could rekindle things, and maybe we could talk about this whole eviction thing, just between us. My stomach churned. Paxton, I said, my voice devoid of emotion, the only connection we ever had was you making my life a living hell, and the only thing we'll be rekindling is your debt. Pay the invoice. I hung up on him too. Their desperation was palpable, and it was delicious. But I wasn't just after their money. I wanted their pride. Over the next few days, I started reclaiming what was mine. The mansion was filled with heirlooms that my grandmother had intended for my mother, but which Sadie and her brothers had conveniently inherited. Priceless antique furniture, rare art pieces, my grandmother's exquisite jewelry collection. I had a detailed inventory from my mother's journals, cross-referenced with old estate photos. I hired a professional appraisal team and an auction house. They arrived like a silent army, cataloging and carefully removing item after item. Sadie, 58, stormed in one afternoon, her face purple with rage. "What do you think you're doing, you little thief?" she shrieked, watching a team carefully crate a 17th century tapestry. "That's my tapestry. It's been in this family for centuries." "It was my grandmother's tapestry, Aunt Sadie," I corrected her, watching the process with satisfaction. "And it's now being auctioned to cover your unpaid rent and damages. Consider it a down payment." She threatened legal action, of course. "My lawyers will have a field day with this. You'll be ruined." But Flynn was ready. He'd anticipated every move. When Sadie's lawyers sent their first cease and desist, Flynn responded with a countersuit so ironclad, so detailed with evidence of their fraud and my mother's rightful claim, that they immediately backed down. He even included a clause about frivolous lawsuits. Sadie's legal team, realizing the depth of the hole they were in, advised her to drop it. She was bleeding money, and I was just getting started. One evening, a week after the eviction notices went out, Carson, my brother, came to my study. He looked troubled. He held a crumpled, yellowed envelope in his hand. "I was going through some of Mom's old things, in the boxes she kept from when we moved out," he said, his voice quiet. "I found this." He handed me a letter, written in my mother's familiar hand. It was dated a few months before she passed away. "My dearest Carson, I know this is hard, and I wish things were different. I never wanted to burden you or Gianna with this. But there are things about that day, about why I didn't fight, that Gianna doesn't know. Not the full truth. I tried to protect her from it, but perhaps that was a mistake. If she ever truly seeks justice, she needs to understand the full picture. It's not just about Sadie and the will. There was something else, something deeper that forced my hand, something I couldn't risk exposing for your sakes. My blood ran cold. Not the full truth. What else was there? What secret had my mother kept, even from me? This wasn't just about Sadie and Flynn's blackmail. This was something else entirely. Something that had forced my mother to walk away from her inheritance without a fight. Carson's discovery, my mother's letter, gnawed at me, not the full truth. It echoed in my mind, a persistent whisper. What else was there? My mother had been so private, so guarded about the past. I'd always assumed her reluctance to fight was due to a combination of Sadie's blackmail and her own gentle nature. But this hinted at something darker, something she'd protected us from. I spent the next few days poring over her journals again, reading between the lines, searching for clues I might have missed. The entries about Sadie's blackmail were clear, detailing how Flynn was coerced, but there were other, vaguer references. Mentions of that night, of the secret, of the shame, that could ruin the family name. My mind flashed back to my childhood. I was maybe 8 years old, a quiet, bookish kid, always in the shadow of Nina. Nina, 34 now, but then she was the golden child, the one everyone praised. Nina's so graceful. Nina's so smart. Why can't you be more like Nina, Ghana? Sadie, 58, had always been the loudest in her adoration of Nina and her disdain for me. I was the dreamer, the distraction, the failure. While Nina was paraded around, I was often shooed away, told to go read a book, to stay out of the way. It wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about a lifetime of being overlooked, of being told I wasn't enough. One journal entry, dated a year before the will was changed, caught my eye. It spoke of a family gathering, a heated argument between my mother and one of her brothers, Uncle Robert, who had passed away years ago. My mother wrote about him threatening to expose something from her past, if she didn't comply with a demand. The entry was cryptic, but it mentioned a specific date, a specific event, a charity gala, years before I was born. I started digging, old newspaper archives, society pages from decades ago. It took days, but I found it. A small, almost forgotten scandal from a local paper, buried deep in the archives. My mother, Mary, who had passed away at 50, had been a vibrant, rebellious young woman in her early 20s. The article detailed a minor embezzlement scheme at a charity she was volunteering for, a sum of money that went missing. The investigation had been quietly dropped, no charges were ever filed, and the money was eventually returned, supposedly by an anonymous donor. But the article hinted at a cover-up, at powerful family connections pulling strings. It suggested Mary had been involved, perhaps even responsible, and the family had swept it under the rug to protect their reputation. It wasn't a major crime, but for a family obsessed with their pristine image, it would have been devastating. A public scandal, especially one involving money and a charity, would have tarnished the Carter name irrevocably. Sadie, with her insatiable appetite for power and control, must have discovered this. She hadn't just blackmailed Flynn. She'd blackmailed my mother, too, threatening to expose this old secret, to drag the family name through the mud, to ruin my mother's reputation and, by extension, mine and Carson's. That's why my mother hadn't fought. She was protecting us from the public shame. The pieces clicked into place. Sadie's manipulation wasn't just about greed. It was about leverage. She'd used my mother's past, her vulnerability to seize control. The depth of her depravity was truly staggering. Now I had everything. The reinstated will, Flynn's testimony, my mother's journals, and now the concrete proof of Sadie's blackmail, the dark secret she'd held over my mother's head. The ultimate takedown was within reach. Just as I felt a grim satisfaction settle in, Carson walked into the study again. He'd been helping me pack up some of the remaining family treasures for auction. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. He was 30 now, still carrying that quiet, observant air. You know, he said, picking up a dusty old photo frame, when you started making all that money, when you bought your first apartment, then your second, I was proud of you, but I also resented it a little. I looked at him, surprised. Resented what? Your success, he admitted, his voice quiet. It was like, you just effortlessly built this empire, while I was still trying to figure things out. I know it sounds stupid, but it felt like you were leaving me behind, like you were becoming everything they wanted us to be, but without them. He paused, then looked at me, his gaze direct. I know why you're doing this, Jonna. I get it, but are you sure this is the only way? His words were a raw, honest confession, and for a moment, I saw the vulnerable boy beneath the stoic facade. It was a reminder that even in my quest for justice, there were consequences, even for those I loved. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Flynn. His voice was urgent. Gianna, we have a problem. A distant cousin, Mackenzie Wilson, just filed an injunction against the estate. She's claiming her father, your Uncle Thomas, was the true heir and that the original will was flawed. She's trying to stop the auctions, stop the evictions. She's 29, just came out of nowhere. This could be a major complication. My blood ran cold again, but this time it was with a different kind of chill. Mackenzie Wilson, a cousin I barely knew, whose father had been a minor, almost forgotten branch of the family. Where had she come from? And why now? This wasn't just about Sadie anymore. The vultures were circling, and they were getting bolder. The Heritage Day dinner was not a celebration, it was a summons. I'd made sure the temporary lease agreements, which Sadie, Paxton, and Nina had signed in their haste to move back into the mansion, included a clause about mandatory participation in certain family events for the duration of their stay. They had grumbled, of course, but the alternative was immediate eviction, and they weren't ready to face that. Not yet. The air in the grand dining room was thick with forced politeness and simmering resentment. The 30-day deadline from the eviction notices was almost up. Sadie, 58, sat at the head of the table, attempting to project an air of gracious hostess, but her eyes darted nervously. Paxton, 36, picked at his food, barely speaking. Nina, 34, was unusually quiet, her gaze fixed on me across the table. Carson, 30, sat beside me, his presence a silent question mark. Mackenzie Wilson, 29, the distant cousin who'd filed the injunction, was also present, seated near Sadie, a defiant glint in her eyes. I'd allowed her in, knowing this was the perfect stage for her to make her move. After the main course, as dessert was being served, Sadie stood clinking her glass. Family, she began, her voice a little too loud. We are here tonight to celebrate our heritage, the Carter legacy, a legacy of strength, of honor, of family. She shot a pointed look at me. Despite recent unpleasantness, we must remember what truly binds us. I rose from my seat, a stack of documents in my hand. Aunt Sadie is right, I said, my voice cutting through the polite murmur. Tonight is indeed about legacy and about truth. I walked to the head of the table, placing the documents directly in front of Sadie. For years, you've woven a beautiful tapestry of lies. Tonight, we unravel it. I started with the will. My grandmother's original will, signed and witnessed, left this entire estate to my mother, Mary, unconditionally. I slid a copy of the original will across the table. However, a few months later, a new will appeared, disinheriting my mother and transferring ownership to her brothers, and by extension, to you, Aunt Sadie. Gasps rippled through the room. Sadie's face was a mask of fury. This is slander. That will was legally binding. It was obtained under duress, I countered, my voice unwavering. I pulled out a thick binder. Flynn Garrett, my mother's former lawyer, was coerced into drafting that new will. He was blackmailed. Sadie, you threatened to expose a minor ethical lapse from early in his career, knowing it would ruin him. I laid out copies of the detailed entries from my mother's journals, describing the blackmail, along with a notarized affidavit from Flynn. He's prepared to testify to every detail. Sadie's eyes widened. She tried to interrupt, but I didn't let her. But that wasn't the only coercion, I continued, my gaze sweeping over the family. My mother, Mary, didn't fight because you held another secret over her head, Sadie. A secret from her past. A minor embezzlement scandal from a charity gala decades ago, which the family covered up to protect its honor. I presented copies of the old newspaper clippings, highlighting the parts that implicated my mother and the subsequent cover-up. You threatened to expose this, to ruin her reputation, to bring public shame upon her, and, by extension, upon Carson and me. That's why she walked away. Not because she wanted to, but because you left her no choice. The room was silent, save for Nina's choked sob. Paxton stared at the table, his face ashen. And just in case anyone thinks this is a fabrication, I said, pulling out my tablet, I've also installed a discrete CCTV system throughout the house. Some of you might remember a certain cousin trying to pick the lock to my study a few weeks ago. I played the footage of Nina's frantic attempts. Nina buried her face in her hands, utterly humiliated. Sadie, recovering her voice, pushed back her chair, attempting to stand. This is outrageous. I won't stand for this. I'm leaving. I placed my hand firmly on the table. You don't own the door, Aunt Sadie. Not anymore. I then pulled out the official deed, stamped and recorded, showing my name as the sole owner. This house is legally mine, every single inch. Just then, Mackenzie, 29, stood up, her voice trembling but determined. This is all very convenient, Gianna, but my father, Uncle Thomas, always said he was the true heir. He was the eldest son. The original will was flawed. I turned to her, a calm smile on my face. A valid point, Mackenzie, and one I anticipated. I pulled out another envelope. While your father may have believed he was the true heir, the truth is he wasn't even a Carter by blood. I opened the envelope, revealing 2 DNA test results. I had a hunch, so I arranged for discrete genetic testing. This test confirms that your father, Thomas, was not biologically related to the Carter lineage. He was adopted, a fact that was kept secret to maintain the family's pure bloodline image. Therefore, your claim, Mackenzie, is entirely invalid. Mackenzie gasped, her face draining of color. The room erupted in stunned whispers. So, I said, my voice ringing through the room, the true legacy is not one of honor, but of deceit. Of stolen inheritances, blackmail, and hidden truths. I walked to the grand fireplace, where the old, ornate Carter family crest was mounted above the mantel. It was a heavy bronze piece, a symbol of their false pride. I grabbed it, the metal cold under my fingers. With a grunt, I pulled it from the wall, the screws groaning. I carried it to the roaring fire, the flames licking at the air. Without a moment's hesitation, I heaved the heavy crest into the heart of the blaze. The flames roared, consuming the polished bronze, turning it black and warped. Nina collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Paxton pushed back from the table with a violent scrape of wood on stone, storming out of the room, his face a mask of impotent rage. Sadie, her eyes fixed on the burning crest, whispered, her voice hoarse, This place will rot without us. You've destroyed everything. I met her gaze, a cold, hard satisfaction settling deep in my bones. It already did, Aunt Sadie, long before I got here. The silence in the mansion was deafening, not the quiet hum of a house waiting for its occupants, but the deep, resonant stillness of a place finally at peace. Weeks had passed since the Heritage Day dinner, since the burning of the crest, since the last furious shouts and the slamming doors. The red ink on the eviction notices had done its job. Sadie, Paxton, and Nina were gone, along with the last vestiges of their entitlement. The auctioneers had come and gone, taking with them the family heirlooms that had paid off the exorbitant back rent and legal fees. The house was stripped of their gaudy additions, reverting to the elegant, if slightly austere grandeur my grandmother had intended. It was mine, all mine, and my mother's. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the polished marble. The grand ballroom, where they had toasted their false legacy, was now just a vast, empty space. The drawing room, where Nina had tried to pick the lock, was clean, the furniture rearranged to my taste. My mother's study, now truly mine, felt like a sanctuary. The victory was complete. I had taken back what was stolen, exposed their lies, and watched their carefully constructed world crumble. Sadie, 58, was reportedly living with a distant relative, her social standing in tatters, her finances decimated by legal fees and the loss of the mansion. Paxton, 36, had apparently moved to a different city, his entrepreneurial dreams likely shattered beyond repair. Nina, 34, had vanished from the social scene, her humiliation too profound to face. Mackenzie Wilson, 29, her claim debunked by the DNA evidence, had quietly withdrawn her injunction. They were all gone, scattered to the winds, their power extinguished. Yet, the silence cut deep. The satisfaction, while potent, was also isolating. I had spent years building towards this, fueled by a singular purpose, a burning desire for justice. Now that it was achieved, a strange emptiness lingered. One afternoon, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I walked to the front door, expecting a delivery, but instead, it was Carson. He stood on the porch, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, a tentative smile on his face. He was 30 now, and for the first time in a long time, he looked less burdened. "Hey," he said, a little awkwardly. "Heard you had some extra rooms." I smiled, a genuine one this time. "Always room for family, Carson. The real kind." He stepped inside, looking around the quiet foyer. "It's different, empty, peaceful," I corrected him. We settled into the kitchen, the one room that felt truly lived in. "So," he began, stirring his coffee, "did it feel good? All of it?" I considered his question. Seeing their faces? Yes. Knowing I finally got justice for Mom? "Absolutely," he nodded slowly. I still struggle with the methods, Gianna. The public humiliation. It felt harsh." "They were harsh, Carson," I said, meeting his gaze. "They were cruel. They stole everything from her, and they never once looked back. They deserve to feel a fraction of what they put her through." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. I don't want you to become them. You're better than that." "I'm not them," I stated firmly. I took back what was mine. There's a difference." He didn't argue, he just nodded, a hint of understanding in his eyes. His presence, quiet and steady, began to fill some of the emptiness in the vast house. He didn't forgive my methods entirely, not yet, but he was here. That was a start. In the weeks that followed, I began the next phase of the mansion's transformation. It wasn't just about reclaiming it. It was about honoring my mother's true legacy, not the one Sadie had tried to impose. I worked with architects and my legal team, setting aside a significant portion of the estate, a sprawling wing with its own entrance and gardens, to be repurposed. A month after Carson moved in, the plans were finalized. I announced the establishment of the Mary Carter Women's Education Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing scholarships and mentorship for young women from disadvantaged backgrounds, helping them pursue higher education and financial independence. The repurposed wing of the mansion would serve as its headquarters, a place where dreams, unlike my mother's, would not be stifled. One evening, I found myself in the grand ballroom, a glass of red wine in my hand. The massive crystal chandelier above me glittered, catching the last rays of the setting sun. I pulled out my phone, setting it up on a tripod. This was for me. A final confession, a closing statement. I pressed record. My name is Gianna. For years, I was the black sheep, the overlooked daughter, the maid. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried my mother's legacy and mine along with it. I paused, a faint smile touching my lips. But karma has a funny way of working. Sometimes karma looks like justice, and sometimes it just looks like me getting what's mine. I stopped the recording. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. Not empty, but full of potential. The house was no longer a monument to their deceit, but a testament to my mother's spirit and my own resilience. I raised my glass, the ruby liquid catching the light. They used to toast here, I whispered, looking up at the glittering chandelier. Now I dance alone. And for the first time, the solitude felt less like a burden and more like freedom.